Disturbing accidents, specifically disturbing film accidents. Today we're going to take a deep dive into all of the accidents that Hollywood has tried their best to cover up. From directors killing their own crew because they just had to get the perfect shot, to arrogant actors who thought that they would be able to nail a stunt by themselves, to some genuine on-set film accidents that nobody saw coming. For those of you who have just found me through this video, this has been an ongoing series on the channel for the last year or so, but to save everyone the headache of having to go back and watch the original series and having to sit through all of the ads, the sponsorships, and the intros, I went ahead and compiled the entire series from volumes 1 to 4, the entire film accident iceberg, and lastly, the 2 caught on film videos. Every single story in this video is timestamped. I also went ahead and put in brand new title cards for each section, so there's not some weird contrast between each one. Handpicked all the music for each section as well, and just overall I just revamped the entire series and compiled it into a supercut so it would be more comfortable to watch for one sitting. Now before we get this started, I wanted to take a moment as this series is coming to an end because this has been a long time in the making. A lot of people who watch me now came from this series, and I wanted to thank all of you for giving me the opportunity to share these people's stories, as that's really the main reason I kept continuing this series in the first place. I really enjoyed being able to be, I guess, that person that gets to fully share these victim stories and touch on the real details that happened without it being mumbled up by fancy lawyer speak or articles beating around the bush. So just wanted to get that out of the way, and thank you all for allowing me to be doing this. This has been one of the most interesting topics I've gotten to research, and I really hope I did every story justice. Now, if you feel that one part of the video, especially during the earlier parts of it, are just, not it, whether it's the camera work sucking or whatever, skip around. The quality only went up as the series went on, but without further ado, let's jump into the first on-set film accident that some of you may already know about. Jackie Chan is no stranger to crazy stunts. In fact, I could probably make an entire video just around that one topic, but the one that I wanted to talk about today was a stunt that nearly got him killed. In Jackie Chan's Armour of God, released in 1986, there is this scene right at the beginning of the film where he's supposed to jump from this tree and ride the branch to cross the gap between these two structures. Now, if you somehow don't know who Jackie Chan is, I would suggest watching the movies because they're freaking awesome. It's probably one of the birthplaces of people doing kung fu fights with their friends. But if you somehow don't know who he is, he does all of his own stunts. That's what he's known for, is besides all of the awesome fight scenes that he's created, a lot of people know him for the fact that he doesn't use strings or anything. He does all of his stunts himself. So during this scene when he jumps, he actually did jump onto the tree and rode it across. But the first time they filmed it, it actually did not go as planned. The branch he grabbed onto actually snapped and he started falling. And he was actually ready for this. He is a professional after all. He was ready for this in case this happened. And you can see him grab onto a lot of the other tree branches, but no matter what he did, all of the other branches just continued to break and snap, and he ended up falling almost 25 feet straight onto his head. Lucky for him, he actually had the reflexes and the knowledge to correctly cushion his landing, because there is an actual correct way to fall. That's why most sets have stunt professionals doing these action sequences, because even in the most dangerous of accidents, just knowing what body part to let hit the ground first will actually manage to save your life. In this situation, by allowing his lower body to take the fall first and by utilizing his arm to cushion his head, he actually managed to come out of this entire thing alive. However, Jackie did sustain some pretty hefty injuries, as it's reported that one of the rocks he came in direct contact with actually severed a hole directly into the side of his head. He's even talked about this exact injury in interviews with Conan O'Brien and has even made him feel the hole in the side of his head. Now before we move on, I wanted to talk about an earlier accident that happened a year prior to this that I think is even worse than just severing a hole in your head. And this stunt is actually my personal favorite from all of the Jackie Chan franchise. So in Police Story that was released in 1985, during the climax of this fight, Jackie leaps off the edge and falls what looks like 6 or 7 stories, causing all of the lights around him to break, and to top it off, he falls through glass at the very bottom of this entire stunt. Doing this entire thing is already pretty impressive. Like, I think most people watching this, it's crazy to think that this guy did this without any safety precautions. Obviously, he had a team ready to go, but he straight up just did this. He jumped onto a pole, slid down, broke all those lights, and crashed through glass. But what if I told you he also burned off all the skin on his hands? Not only that, but he suffered a dislocated pelvis and has been said to be lucky that he didn't get paralyzed. Since this incident has happened, Jackie Chan's actually gone on the record explaining that after this incident occurred, he didn't realize how injured he was until all of his adrenaline wore off. Again, we're starting pretty light off. This is just in my opinion, a run-of-the-mill Jackie Chan incident. If you watch a lot of Jackie Chan films, this probably didn't surprise you too much because he's always breaking his body and doing crazy stuff. But just wait till we get to the next one. Roar is a movie that came out in 1981 and was created by this man, Noel Marshall. Based on the cover, you can probably tell it's going to be some sort of adventure movie with lions, tigers, and all sorts of other animals. And you'd be correct if you assumed all that. It's about a man that lives on his own preserve with a collection of big cats with the intention of studying their behavior. The wild animals in the film are a huge part of the story and are seen many times throughout the film. Throughout the film, you see a lot of the animals playing around with the actors and actresses, specifically the lions even going as far as pinning down and playfully biting and scratching some of the actors and actresses. And if you're watching a lot of movies, you would assume that these are just like trained animals going through some choreography with people on set, but that's actually not the case. Every animal that's in this movie is actually just a wild animal, straight up mauling on people. Every single animal that you see in this movie is not professionally trained. There was no person on set that was there to take care of and professionally move these animals. They were just literally wild animals that were released to be played with on screen. It was this decision by the director that cost over 70 people very serious injuries that were on the cast and crew. And most of the injuries were caused by the lions that were on screen, as well as one injury that happened with the elephant that's in the movie. And it's no wonder because these cats were not professionally trained animals. The ones that you see on screen that actually were the cause of many maulings of the cast and crew were the personal cubs of Noel Marshall that he tried raising with his family in the hopes that they'd become comfortable around humans. And it's at this point that it's actually important to note that Noel Marshall actually had a lot of his family involved in the making of this movie as well. What's truly disturbing about this film is these scenes in which people were actually injured by the animals were all left in the movie. So when you hear people in the movie screaming for help or telling them to stop, they're being serious. They're actually calling out to the director to stop what was going on, and he would just ignore it and keep filming. This included scenes where the director's own family had to be sent to the hospital because of what happens on screen. And as I mentioned earlier, there was a separate incident during the making of this movie with an elephant, where the elephant crushed one of the cast members' legs with its tusk. If you're interested, I'll leave a link below to a compilation that someone made of all of the scenes involving the lion attacks, because there are a lot throughout the film, and some of them are just insane to watch, because knowing that no one got injured when the making of this film is just a wild fact after you see what exactly transpires on the screen. A Clockwork Orange is already a pretty unsettling film to watch for most people, but there lies an even more disturbing on-set accident that involved the main actor, Malcolm McDowell. His character Alex is seen enduring a psychological technique known as the Ludovico technique, an experimental aversion therapy where they strap you to a chair, clamp your eyes open, pumping you full of chemicals and forcing you to stay awake and watch whatever they subject you to. What makes this scene even harder to watch is knowing that when they filmed the original shot, Malcolm McDowell's corneas were actually scratched when they decided to put the clamp over his eyeballs. And even worse than that, they forced him to keep his eyes open for so long that it actually caused him to temporarily go blind after filming. And to make matters worse, after they initially shot the scene, they had the audacity to ask him to do the scene again. And after reluctantly agreeing, they scratched his cornea again. And this isn't even the worst thing that happened when making this movie. McDowell actually cracked several of his ribs when shooting another fight scene. This occurred when an actor kicked him a little too hard in the chest. And we're still not done with Clockwork Orange. There's actually one more thing that happened on the set of this movie that is just very, very creepy. There was another scene in the movie where they straight up drown the main actor. These policemen hold his head underwater for a full minute and a half, which, if you don't know, is bordering the amount that the average person can actually hold their breath for. If you Google it, it actually says that people can only hold their breath on average for 30 to 90 seconds long. And that's given that you have enough time to prep. If you watch the movie, you can see he just gets his head shoved in without any warning. All of this happened under the supervision of director Stanley Kubrick, which a lot of people have referred to as an actual psychopath during the filming of this movie because of how unbothered he was by the deteriorating health of the main actor. There's even a quote that I saw online about what he told Malcolm McDowell after his cornea got scratched. Supposedly, Kubrick went on record stating, "Let's carry on, I'll favor your other eye." He said that to him so they could just continue filming, which is it's just crazy to think about how much people get away with just because they pressure these actors into doing things out of fear of being blackballed in Hollywood. It might shock you to find out that during the filming of Back to the Future 2 and 3, there were two separate incidents that nearly killed two different people. In Back to the Future 3, Michael Fox almost accidentally hung himself. You might be asking yourself, like, how do you accidentally do that? It's not like you trip and fall and end up in that situation. If you've actually watched the film, you know there's a scene in the movie where Marty is dragged by Mad Dog and his gang by this rope, ultimately trying to lynch him in front of the entire town. During the making of this scene, Michael Fox's airways were actually blocked because of how tight the rope became that he was knocked unconscious. What's really scary about this situation is that the more you ask for help and panic, it just looks like you're being an amazing actor. And that's what a lot of people that were on set of this movie thought was happening. A lot of people were convinced that Michael Fox was just giving the performance of his life. Luckily, there was one person on set who didn't buy it. From a few articles that I've read, it appears that Michael Fox actually hung there in the air unconscious for a few seconds before people decided to go and help him. One of the crew members thought his acting was a little too convincing and went to aid the actor, and fortunately for Michael Fox, he actually came out of the situation alive, which isn't what most people can say when doing a stunt like this. Now, I didn't know this before researching this specific scene, but presumably this specific stunt of trying to hang someone safely on screen has gone wrong a fair amount of times in Hollywood. And I find it so disturbing because in this situation, as the actor, as I said before, the red flags that would tell people on the set like, oh my god, this dude is actually dying, they could easily be mistaken for just top-notch acting, causing everyone to just stand there and watch you die. It's unclear if what's in the movie is the shots where Michael Fox endured this injury. I'm pretty sure it's not, but what is confirmed to be in the film is one of these onset accidents, which actually took place in the second movie, Back to the Future 2. There was an accident that made its way into the final cut of the film, and it's during the famous hoverboard scene where Marty gets chased by Griff and his gang. The accident can be seen on screen during this specific part where Griff and the rest of his buddies fly directly into the courthouse and smash into the glass. Now, if you look closely, you can see one person doesn't quite make it through the glass like everyone else. What looks like just another part of the scene is very unnerving when you realize that this person was not supposed to fall outside of the courthouse. The mark that the stunt performers were supposed to hit was on the inside of the courthouse, and the people that fly through the building actually land on this foam padding. However, this person on the outside of the courthouse falls straight onto the hard floor. Before we talk about what happened to Cheryl Wheeler, which is the stunt performer that had the misfortune of getting injured during this take, I think it's important to go over what led to this stunt becoming what it was. The way the stunt was supposed to work was that 4 stunt performers were to be attached to a crane that was going to swing back and forth until they were able to generate enough momentum to break through the glass of the courthouse. And while attached still, while the crane was swinging and broke them through, someone was going to, off the side, look and make sure that everyone was broken through the glass, and then they would press a button that would safely cut all the harnesses off, and they would fall to the ground below onto the padding. Seems somewhat simple and safe, and I think it was an okay plan for this stunt. What was not okay though was when they tested it with sandbags. They got 4 sandbags, attached them to the cranes, and did the stunt like that. 2 of the sandbags missed the mark. So you'd think after testing it didn't go correctly, most people would pack it up and be like, you know what, this stunt isn't safe. But they didn't do that. They actually got live performers to test it again. And 2 of those performers got injured because it failed again, and they missed their mark because they kept hitting the pillars in front of the courthouse. And you'd think after that happened that they would be like, oh, okay, you know what, we tried it with real people, it doesn't work. They still decided to film it even after testing twice. And this sucks because the person that got the short end of the stick was Cheryl Wheeler, who wasn't even supposed to be in the stunt in the first place. She's only in it because another stunt performer was too scared to do it and got cold feet and called it quits. So Cheryl stepped up to be the replacement for that person. Now I am being a little overdramatic because the crew, to give them some credit, did actually test it. I think it was a few more times before Cheryl was going to come in and do the final take with all the rest of the crew. And they did make sure that in the testing, it did work properly. But this all changed during the day of filming. When they were testing the stunts, the way it worked was they had a person named Greg Tippy outside of the building looking at the performers, and they also used breakaway glass that was clearly translucent. You could very clearly see through it. If you watch the movie, you'll notice they didn't use very translucent glass. They used glass that was very hard to see through, and it's because when they filmed the scene during the actual day they were going to shoot it, they changed the glass, and they also changed where the button presser stood. Greg Tippy, who is the person that ended up pushing the button, decided on the day of filming that he's just going to change up the entire routine and walk inside of the courthouse and press the button from in there, because he thought that being inside he'd be able to see very clearly if everyone was coming out of the building or not. And to add insult to injury, there was even one more change they did that made it even worse, that caused this on-set disaster, and it was the fact that they added a rocket to the end of Griff's hoverboard, which caused a lot of smoke to blast in the air, which would make it even harder for Greg to see if everyone made it safely into the courthouse. That would tell him whether or not he could push the button and drop everyone on the foam padding. So it was all these last minute changes on the day of filming that really led to this on-set disaster. And Cheryl Wheeler, the stunt performer, wasn't an idiot. She expressed concerns over every single one of these points, asking her stunt coordinator multiple times where exactly her mark was that she had to hit, where everyone was going to be standing at, and what exactly was the same from the day of testing and what was different from the initial testing. The stunt coordinator, known as Walter Scott, at least from what I could read, was getting somewhat mildly irritated at the fact that yet another stunt performer was going to get cold feet and quit on him. Cheryl Wheeler was a replacement for another stunt person known as Lisa McCullough. You might be wondering why someone would even go through with a stunt like this, given the fact that they had this much concern over it. And to answer that, I think we need to take in the context of the situation and the time period in which this happened. Because it was 1985 and Cheryl was a female stunt performer, there was a lot of pressure during that time to basically hold up this facade of, surely I can keep up with the male stuntmen. And also there was a lot of pressure from the fact that she would literally be leaving the stunt for cold feet for the same reasons that Lisa McCullough did. And on top of that, Cheryl had just started doing stunt work that year, so she didn't want to cause any trouble and risk being labeled as that person on set. And so for all those reasons, she trusted the 20 years experience that her stunt coordinator had, and despite all of her concerns, she went through with this action sequence. When we actually got to the day of filming, there was a lot of arguing that went on between Cheryl and the man responsible for doing the wire cutting, which was known as Greg Tippy. Cheryl kept asking Greg about all these questions. Why are you going to stand over there? Why are we using this new glass instead of the old one? And how are you possibly going to see me from the inside when all the smoke comes out? And basically every one of her concerns were met with like, lady, I know how to do my job. Don't tell me how to do my job. So the stunt happened. And while it was going on, like while she was actually being hurled at the courthouse by the crane, it was very clear to her in that moment that she was going to hit the pillar. She even admits in a memoir that she could literally see, like, I am going to hit this pillar and there's nothing I can do to stop it. But she felt somewhat okay in the situation, because what she thought was going to happen was that after the guy sees, oh, Cheryl clearly didn't make it into the courthouse. I'm not gonna push the button. So she was like, whatever, I might get hurt a little bit, but it's fine. I'm not gonna die or anything. And all that went away when they actually cut the cord and she stared straight down at like a 30-foot drop and smacked straight into the concrete floor. And you can see this happen in the actual movie scene. She even explains that during this fall, all she was thinking was, yeah, I'm dead. I'm dying today. Somehow she miraculously lived through the situation and went on to do other things in her life after the fact. And it's crazy to think about because she ended up requiring a lot of reconstructive surgery, but thankfully this was not the cause of her demise. And it's pretty insane to think about because when I go back and rewatch the movie, like, it's so weird because this is one of my favorite childhood scenes. I'm sure like every kid that watched Back to the Future got a skateboard and pretended they were on a hoverboard. I've recreated this scene so many times when I was a kid, and knowing that it has this like disturbing backstory is just so unsettling when you go watch the movie now. Noah's Ark is a 1928 American epic silent film that was directed by Michael Curtiz that was obviously based on the biblical story of Noah. Produced by Warner Brothers, the film is known for its ambitious production and special effects. The movie tells the same story of Noah, who builds an ark to save himself, his family, and animals from a flood that is brought on by humanity's wickedness. What sets this film apart from a lot during this time was the director's dedication to making it extremely lifelike and realistic, requiring a massive set that included a life-sized ark and the terrible decision to utilize a flood sequence that required thousands of gallons of water. It was this decision to use that much water to try and create a realistic depiction of the flood that caused the loss of many lives. The director was very secretive about what was going to happen during this flood sequence, and in fact, a lot of the performers were unaware that thousands of gallons of water were going to be dropped on them during this sequence. And what ended up happening was a lot of them were basically left to fend for themselves. And we know this because a star from the movie known as Dolores Costello did a documentary series known as Hollywood, a celebration of the American silent film, and during episode 1, she talks about her experience on the set of Noah's Ark, and specifically during the flood part of the film. Rather than summarize her words, I'll just let Dolores explain how psychotic Michael Curtiz was.
Horned steer in there, and human beings, and some dummies. But he put the human beings where the real set was, and the dummies where the breakaway was, because he wanted realism, as he called it. There were people injured. I found a man leaning against my dressing room door, which was really an office. And he was heavily bandaged. And I said, "What's wrong?" He said, 38 ambulances have left. I'm in better condition than most of them, and they're coming back for me. And he said, "I think somebody's been killed."
This guy deliberately put human actors next to permanent parts of the set because he wanted realistic reaction and experiences to be caught on film. In other words, this guy purposely put other people's lives at risk because he thought it would make for a better movie. As you heard from that little snippet, there's a ton of people that were injured, but there was also 3 people that passed away from this scene and 1 person who lost his leg as a result. All of this could have easily been avoided, and what's really disturbing about this entire situation is the fact that people claim that the original footage, the original cut, does exist somewhere. That original film with people actually squirming around and you seeing the actual deaths happen on screen exists somewhere out in the world as lost media. And in the cut that's public and available to watch, you can still see the real panic on people's faces when the water drops on them unexpectedly. This is truly one of the worst disturbing accidents to ever be caught on film. Everyone should know about the Twilight Zone. It's the famous show with Rod Serling that features tales of science fiction, fantasy, and humanity in ways that would end in either surprise twists or some kind of lesson. The modern day equivalent is Black Mirror, minus the timelessness that the original Twilight Zone shares. it was quite popular in the 1960s when it originally aired. So it was a no-brainer for executives and everyone around Hollywood during this time to push for a Twilight Zone movie. And that's exactly what happened. Steven Spielberg was drafted to produce the film, along with the more infamous person in this story, John Landis, who by the end of this segment, you should see as a very heinous individual. The film was set to stay true to the source material, opting to have a few stories from the original series recreated into the movie. Because after all, the Twilight Zone is an anthology series, so it didn't really make for the easiest transition to film. They solved the issue by making the movie into 4 separate segments, effectively making it into an anthology film. The 4 segments were reimaginings of 4 separate episodes that were recreated and repurposed into the Twilight Zone movie. Those episodes were Kick the Can, It's a Good Life, Nightmare at 20,000 Feet, and the segment that is the reason this movie is on this list, which is the first segment titled Time Out. This one takes elements from 2 episodes of the original series, A Quality of Mercy and another one titled Back There. Vic Morrow plays a racist man who, through his continued bigotry, gets sent back in time to Nazi Germany. This allows him to feel the effects of racism, only he is the victim now. During the filming of this, there was to be a climactic sequence towards the end that involved a helicopter, Vic Morrow, and 2 children named Micah Din Lee and Renee Shin-Yi Chen. The original scene of the movie was going to feature Vic Morrow saving these 2 Vietnamese children from oncoming fire. The ending would feature a fully functioning war helicopter that would fly extremely close to the actors. The entire plan was to have the helicopter fly towards a patch of land at the end of this river. Then Vic Morrow, with the kids in his arms, would carry each one to the other end of the river. Then the scene would climactically end with rockets being sent out as the trio got into the helicopter and out of harm's way. It was a pretty ambitious stunt to have in your film, and it was even more dangerous to even attempt filming it. So dangerous, in fact, that many crew members, from pilots to members of the production team, were fighting for this scene to be seized from filming, or at the very least, tamed the hell down. John Landis, who was the director for this segment, showed zero remorse for not only just Vic Morrow, but also the children, repeatedly asking the pilots to fly the helicopter even closer to the actors. It was his arrogance for wanting to make what he thought would be an amazing piece of film that cost the life of not just Vic Morrow, but also the 2 child actors. When the shot was put into action, everything was proceeding as planned. The helicopter got extremely close to the actors, turning in the air to make its landing, when an accidental explosive went off. A mortar was fired way too early, causing it to hit the tail end of the helicopter and completely rip it off. This obviously caused the helicopter to crash into the water below, with the helicopter blades killing Vic Morrow and Micah Lee, with the body of the helicopter causing Renee Chen to pass as well. It's just a horrible, horrible accident that could have easily been prevented. You know, just to really push how much of an evil person John Landis really was, they weren't even legally allowed to use the children in the shot. At the time of filming, the laws surrounding child actors were pretty strict, especially with time constraints, transparency, and curfews. So to circumvent the issue, John Landis hired 2 child actors as extras, which allowed him to keep them on set longer than he should have been able to. He also chose, at least from what I've read online, chose to not disclose the dangerous nature of the stunt with the parents until the day of filming. And what's really horrible about this is the fact that the mother of Renee Chen was on set watching this entire stunt go down. I don't even know how to react to that. Like, I'm not even a parent of anyone, but just put yourself in her shoes. I can't even imagine how horrible it must feel to see that happen, and there's nothing you could do as the parent but watch. And of course, it ended up going to court because there was a pretty good case to make for negligence on part of the director and also some people on the crew. And it's rumored that during the court hearing, John Landis pulled yet another grimy move. Now, this is just rumored. I don't know if this is actually confirmed or not. From what I've read online through some articles, it does appear to be the truth, but I'm not gonna say that set in stone. So basically what John Landis started doing during these court hearings was when they were on break, he would tell people about him making a movie about the trial that they were on, inciting that he might even want the actual jury to be played in the movie as themselves. And in doing so, it was in the jury's best interest to let John Landis free, because if John Landis was in jail, how would they get their big break and be able to be in the movie? Again, I don't know if that's the case or not, but what ended up happening is he was acquitted of all charges. Now, regardless of why he was acquitted in the first place, it is absolutely this guy's fault that this even happened. There's just way too many accounts of witnesses that show that people definitely expressed concern over the sequence in the movie, and he just went on his merry way with it anyways. And honestly, the worst part of this entire thing is the fact that this guy went on to live a pretty normal life, making movies after the fact, and he's shown zero guilt for what he did. Because yes, you caused this, dude. I don't know if somehow this guy will end up watching this video, but you are the problem. You caused those 3 people to die. This guy is just pure evil. There's so many interviews on the internet where it's incredibly clear that this guy just does not care about what happened. I wanted to remind everyone and make it clear that this was a preventable accident. And I think most of the people that were defendants in this case should have been put in jail for their carelessness. From the pilot, who succumbed to the peer pressure of filming the entire stunt, allowing the director to force him into doing it, to the director John Landis, who repeatedly ignored everyone's pleas and cries to not go through with filming this scene and did it anyways. John Landis refuses to accept the reality of the situation, which is that he got 3 people killed, instead choosing to live inside of an echo chamber where he legitimately believes that he's a great guy. I'm going to leave you with a quote from John Landis, and I'll leave a link below to this one because I doubt that any of you will actually believe that this guy said this. Now I'm just going to read this directly off what I wrote because I don't want to get any details wrong. Now, John Landis attended Vic Morrow's memorial service a few days after the incident happened, and it was here that he delivered the most egotistical, disgustingly arrogant quote to the people at the memorial service. He said, and I quote, "Tragedy can strike in an instant, but film is immortal. Vic lives on forever. Just before the last take, Vic took me aside to thank me for the opportunity to play this role." So while people are mourning over the death of this amazing actor, this dude is trying to sell the idea that what he did is not that bad, and in fact, people should be thanking him for allowing this guy to get the role. How self-righteous, egotistical, and narcissistic do you have to be to think what you did was right, and also go drive to a memorial service that you shouldn't even be at, and on top of that, deliver that line? Screw this guy. Like, honestly, like, John Landis, if you're out there, dude, like, screw you, dude. I don't understand how I have no idea how this guy managed to get away with this, because it's just insane that this entire set even happened, and then he got away with it. He actually got away with it. To end on somewhat of a positive note, this movie did impact the way that we film movies today. I'm pretty sure that there's a lot more provisions specifically involving flying vehicles and helicopters in movies, as well as child labor laws, because you shouldn't be able to get around that by just hiring kids as extras. So there is somewhat of a positive light for this one, but honestly, screw John Landis, man. On the set of Passion of the Christ, lead actor Jim Caviezel took quite the beating over the course of shooting that movie. The first incident we're going to talk about wasn't really an accident, it was more just pure chance that it occurred. During the filming of the Sermon on the Mount scene, actor Jim Caviezel was struck by lightning. He describes the moment as there being a fire on either side of his head, even having an out-of-body experience due to the incident being so sudden. Now that was pretty much sheer bad luck. There wasn't really an accident that could have been prevented there, but the same cannot be said for what happened during the rest of the filming. During the flogging scene where Jesus is whipped repeatedly, Jim was struck by one of the whips, and mostly because of bad training and also bad planning. To set up this stunt, they had a metal plate that was placed right behind Jim Caviezel's back, so that in hindsight, if anyone tried to hit Jim Caviezel on the back, it would hit the metal plate instead. But of course, that's not what ended up happening. I believe the reason this went wrong was because the actors were instructed to get a running start almost like a baseball pitcher would, and then they would fling their whips almost like they're throwing a baseball. But in doing so, one of the whips actually whipped around the metal plate and ripped a 14-inch gash into Jim Caviezel's side. If that wasn't bad enough, during the crucifixion scene, which is one of the most iconic parts of that movie, it's said that Caviezel dislocated his shoulder not just once, but several times during the filming of this scene. Most of this injury occurred when they were filming the scene in which Jim Caviezel is carrying the wooden crucifix. You have to keep in mind that he is really carrying this. Jim Caviezel on screen is really the person that is holding this wooden crucifix up, and it's over 150 pounds. So it's no wonder that he dislocated his shoulders several times while shooting this specific sequence. But it's moments like this where Jesus is slammed into the ground that also resulted in a dislocated shoulder. And none of this even compares to when he was posted up on the mountain. He was really propped up on top of the mountain and the crucifix was posted in the ground. Due to crazy weather conditions and the way that he was being propped up and hung, he suffered pneumonia during the filming of this part. For those that are unaware, when you are hung on a cross like this, you will begin to suffer from asphyxiation, which is just fancy talk for suffocating to death. I wasn't able to find any information on how Jim Caviezel was hung in this fashion, but he really did deal with these issues that come with being hung on the cross. And even after telling you all that, there wasn't even a guarantee that this stunt was safe. This is because the way in which they put the post in the ground led to the cross repeatedly swaying from side to side. And they were on top of a mountain, so if the cross were to come out of the ground and fall, Jim Caviezel most likely would have ended up dead. And that's crazy because you'd think at the very least doing a dangerous stunt like this, whatever they could control, which was posting the crucifix in the ground safely, would be done correctly, but it wasn't. So during the initial filming, when they first filmed the crucifixion scene, Mel Gibson actually saw the cross swaying from side to side, and he made Jim Caviezel get up on the crucifix again, and they filmed for over 5 weeks because the first take that they had wasn't good enough. He forced Jim to do this because Mel thought it would take away from the climax of the movie, which is this sequence. He wanted Jesus to be in the main frame and not the cross. So he forced him to do another 5 weeks of shooting just to get the perfect shot. And that's going to be a running theme with a lot of these. You've already seen it in part 1 and for the first item on today's video. A lot of directors are just going through these amazing lengths to get the so-called perfect shot when they aren't the ones that are going to be at risk. Overall, it's just crazy how much Jim Caviezel endured just to make the film, but I wouldn't feel too bad for the guy because he seems to have taken it with a grain of salt, having done multiple interviews explaining how the entire experience made him grow closer to his Christian faith. On the set of the movie The Crow, actor Brandon Lee was shot with a gun firing supposedly a blank, but when he fell down and never got back up, it became increasingly clear that that's not really what happened. The way this went down was when the actor shot the blank at Brandon Lee, he fell down and went through with the entire scene. Only the crew didn't realize he wasn't acting until it was time to reshoot, and they noticed he wasn't getting back up. The reason Brandon wasn't getting back up was because he actually did take a shot to the chest, but this wasn't because there was a real bullet inside of the gun. This is because there was an obstruction that was inside of the barrel of the gun, so when they shot the blank, it shot that out instead. The first thought that might come to your head when you hear this is, how did the obstruction get there? So a few weeks prior, they used a dummy bullet in the gun, which is essentially just a real bullet with the gunpowder removed. These are used on set quite frequently to get viewers to believe that they are shooting real guns that are actually loaded. It adds to the overall realism. So before the scene with Brandon Lee was shot, they used the same gun that was shot weeks prior with that dummy bullet inside, and because someone either forgot to check or just didn't think about it at the time, when they used that same gun, there was actually a piece of metal from the dummy round stuck inside of the barrel. That little metal piece, to my knowledge, is known as a primer cap. This end of the bullet, this tiny little metal circle, when the bullet is shot dry, it still has enough power to lodge that tiny circle into the gun, resulting in an obstruction. This is easily noticeable if you took the opportunity to check the gun. If you open the gun up and look down the barrel, you will notice no light coming through, and if you simply check the barrel from the other end, you will clearly see it lodged in there. Unfortunately, no one did this on the set of The Crow, so when Brandon Lee's character was shot using a blank, he fired that little primer cap directly at him with the same speed of a bullet, causing him to pass away. What's really sad about this entire situation is most people tried spinning the story into a conspiracy about how the mafia killed Bruce Lee and how they staged this movie in order to kill his son, Brandon Lee. But none of that is really what happened. It's just another incident where poor safety precautions or safety precautions just not being followed are what resulted in yet another horrible film accident. You might be shocked to find out that one of the worst injuries sustained on a film set happened in one of the most popular fantasy series. During the making of Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows, there was a sequence with Harry and Voldemort that would result in Harry flying backwards. I imagine it was due to a spell or an explosion of some sorts. There isn't really any details behind the sequence, but we know it was a sequence involving Harry and Voldemort because the stunt double that was going to be in the scene has explained that. The basic point you need to know before explaining the stunt is there is an industry standard stunt, or what I think to be an industry standard stunt, called a jerkback. A jerkback involves the stunt performer being thrown back, usually after an explosion, falling onto some kind of safety mat on the ground. The scene with Harry and Voldemort was going to involve a jerkback, so Daniel Radcliffe's stunt double, David Holmes, was gearing up for the stunt, and before shooting it, they decided that they would rehearse it. During this rehearsal for the stunt is where the accident happened. When they went through with it and David was flown into the air, as the stunt happened, David was thrown a lot further back than he anticipated, so much so that he hit the wall directly behind him, slamming his back into it and then falling onto the mat in front of him. Hearing this might not shock you because we've gone over other horrible accidents, like in part 1, the Back to the Future incident. A lady literally fell 30 feet onto concrete, but David ended up paralyzed from this incident, and he was paralyzed for the foreseeable future. It's really unfortunate that this happened, not just because being paralyzed is a horrible thing that can occur, but the fact that David had a really good history as a stunt performer. He spent many years working his way up the Hollywood ladder, being Harry's stunt double from the very first movie up until the last movie, only for this accident to basically shift his life into a completely different direction. Now, I put this one on today's video because this ends up being a very heartwarming and inspiring story. Despite the mental toll that this would take on literally anybody, David Holmes has taken it with such an amazing attitude, and I would say that this guy is currently living his best life. I believe he's still friends with Daniel Radcliffe, as they have worked together for many years, having even done a podcast called Cunning Stunts, where David Holmes, with the sometimes help of guest host Daniel Radcliffe, talk to various stunt performers and have them talk about their most dangerous stunts and the aftermath. David has one of the most positive attitudes regarding the situation that I just don't think many people would. You honestly gotta respect him for it. He even still does death-defying, adrenaline-pumping experiences, having a specially modified car that allows him to do his race driving on racetracks at speeds up to 150 miles per hour. I mean, to go from this crazy accident to still doing what he loves and even trying to spin his turmoil into a podcast for us to enjoy, I just don't see how you can't love that. This is a 1970s epic war film that dramatized the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor. At least that's what Wikipedia says. This movie was extremely controversial when it came out because it tried to be objective about the Pearl Harbor attacks. The movie's tagline is literally "The incredible attack on Pearl Harbor as told from both the American and Japanese sides." Americans did not enjoy the Japanese side of the story being treated with so much respect. In fact, it's this controversy that overshadowed a much bigger problem that happened on set of this war epic. There was a stunt involving a plane that went horribly wrong. Here is what the stunt finally ended up looking like when it came out on the film. Notice how real it all looks. That's because that's a real plane crashing, a real fire, and just real everything. A lot of people seem to think that this crash and explosion was not planned at all, and that's just not true. From my understanding, the original plan for the stunt was for the plane to basically start on the runway, start driving, and then it was gonna pass all of these planes on the side, and then once it started flying, it was going to be exploded remotely with a bunch of explosives that were on board the plane. This is not what happened when they actually went to film it. What the team making this film did not account for was the plane taking off a little bit early, and that's what ended up happening when they did the stunt the first time. Also, the plane had no pilot inside, and it was controlled entirely remotely. This meant that when the plane started to accidentally lift up, there was no one in there to force it back down to the ground, resulting in this disturbing behind the scenes footage of the event. The plane lifted up and crashed into these paper mache models of real planes, then stopping its crash here and exploding. It exploded because the plane had real gasoline and real explosives on board for the originally planned stunt. What's scary about this is just how close people got to dying. I mean, like, look at this one guy that dove out of the way. Literally dove out of the way and just barely didn't get touched. And the reactions you all are seeing on screen is completely genuine and real because this was not part of the plan. This was honestly luck at its finest because the people that were there on set were not just regular old extras. They were actually stuntmen who probably had way better instincts when it came to stunts turning deadly. During an interview about the stunt, stuntman Phil Adams explained that they were running for their lives, and not just from the explosion, but from the shrapnel flying everywhere. The footage of the explosion found its way into the final cut of the movie, which made for a spectacular scene that just couldn't be recreated today. The stuntmen involved even laugh over this now because they realize just how lucky they were to have lived this entire situation. Luckily, during this specific incident, no one died or sustained any serious damage, which is something that cannot be said for the rest of the films on today's video. Dukes of Hazzard is an American action comedy TV series that aired on CBS from 1979 all the way to 1985. It's a pretty iconic TV show starring two young cousins, Bo and Luke Duke. This story has a ton of misinformation out there, so I'm going to start by explaining what people think happened, and then I'll tell you guys exactly what happened. So there is a lot of stunts on this show from the famous car, the General Lee. Usually this car would be making these long jumps over various obstacles, all accompanied by that sweet sounding. Because of the sheer amount of stunts that happened in this show, it's no wonder why people think that if a death happened on set, it had to be because of one of these death-defying stunts. Cameraman Rodney Mitchell is the victim in all of these stories, but his story is almost never told correctly. He did not pass away due to a poorly handled stunt on the set of Dukes of Hazzard. A lot of people seem to believe, much like in my last video regarding film accidents, that it was the carelessness of the crew or on the director's end that led to Rodney Mitchell losing his life, but that's just not true. Most of what I'm about to say comes from a first-hand account from somebody that was there on set the day that Rodney Mitchell passed away. The actor John Schneider, who played Bo Duke on the show, explained in a video that he posted over 3 years ago what really went down on set. Because of how they filmed Dukes of Hazzard, they would be driving around constantly from place to place. The way that he explained it in his video was there was a central base camp that they would all meet at and converge at, and then they would start filming at locations, and they would drive around from location to location almost like in a circle around the entire place, getting all of the shots needed to make the show happen. They would frequently use vehicles to get from one location to the next, and one of those vehicles that was used very frequently was the camera car, also known as an insert car. These types of vehicles are used on set all the time because you can store all types of equipment, and more often than not, in this specific circumstance, they would have the cast right on top or somewhere on the truck to get taken to the next area. It was really common and convenient for most of the crew to be doing this. John Schneider even admits in that video that he had done this thousands of times before when they were filming because it was just the fastest and most efficient way to go about shooting the show. The reason I'm saying all this so much is because I want to emphasize how normalized it was. I don't want people to get the wrong idea and think that this was due to sheer carelessness, because hindsight is always going to be 2020 when it comes to these situations. And at the time of shooting Dukes of Hazzard, it was very normal for people to sit on top of this insert car, sit on top of this camera truck, if you will. In fact, it was so normalized that people would just opt to sit on top of the truck even while they were filming parts of the show. While the cameraman was in the bed of the truck with his eye in the lens and filming those amazing shots that you see in the show, people were sitting on top of the truck watching. So this was just one little detail that ended up culminating into what John Schneider calls a perfect storm. This is Ray from the future. I just noticed while editing this that I did not talk about the picture of the actual insert truck car that I found online. It took a lot of digging for me to find this picture, but what you're seeing on screen, at least to my knowledge, is the only photo on the internet that exists of what might be the insert car or the camera truck that was actually used on the set of Dukes of Hazzard that ended up leading to Rodney's death. Again, this is not confirmed. This is just my speculation because this is the only photo I've been able to find with any sort of production team on set that had a camera truck of some sort with a upper deck with PVC pipe in the back and a lower deck with stuff, like room to put stuff on. I'm putting this out there because I want people to just get the most information out of this video that they can. Again, this is not confirmed to be the actual insert car. This is just what I found in my hours of looking for a picture of the insert car, and I didn't want those hours of research to go to waste. Anyways, back to the video. One really unfortunate day, it rained really hard here in California, and that paired with the fact that the road had just gotten a lot of use on set from them driving constantly around. There were these parts of the road, at least from my understanding, it was kind of like a dirt gravel-ish road. There were warped parts of the road. So if you hit these, you'd kind of jump up a little bit, kind of like when you have bumps in the road when you're driving to your friend's house or something. And on this particular shot that they were getting with the camera truck, they're going around 25 miles an hour, not too fast. And Rodney was laser focused. He had his eye in the camera. He was trying his best to get the perfect shot, make sure everything was great, when all of a sudden the operator of the truck hit one of those worn down areas. And because there was people sitting on top of the car, the weight actually shifted the truck and it caused it to flip over, ending Rodney's life in the process. John Schneider says all the time that this was just like a perfect storm. It was a culmination of a lot of things for the truck to flip over. The rain withering down the road being extra slippery, Rodney just laser focused on the camera so he couldn't even tell what was happening until it was too late, and just the sheer weight of the people on board that caused the truck to flip over at the tiniest little bump in the road. What's really disheartening about this is just how out of the blue it was. John even explains in his video that the operator driving the truck was probably the best person on set to actually handle this job, telling an anecdote about how this specific driver had driven them through the rain before and no one ever questioned their safety because this specific operator was behind the wheel. Everyone felt really safe with this one guy behind the wheel. So it really was just a freak accident that ended up causing the loss of this cameraman's life. From what I've read, a lot of people that were on the cast of Dukes of Hazzard really liked Rodney and said that he was one of the best parts of shooting Dukes of Hazzard. And he is the sole reason there are so many amazing shots in that show. A pretty bittersweet ending to this cameraman's life, but call it a silver lining. I think it's cool that at least his legacy gets to live on in these amazing shots that he was able to capture from his time working on Dukes of Hazzard. This movie's in the thumbnail, and it's for good reason. No one has been able to actually see this film besides when it came out all those years ago. It was released in the 1920s and remains a piece of lost media that is said to contain a horrific film accident that was put into the final cut of the movie. The movie itself was an American silent drama that was released, as I said before, in the 1920s, and it was produced and distributed by Fox. This film starred the American Daredevil stunt pilot and actor known as Armour Locklear. It was a simple film plot-wise. It was just about a veteran who gets involved into a crime-driven plot where a bunch of separate gangs and him are after these special jewels, all of this culminating and leading to the climactic sequence, which would take the life of Armour Locklear. It's important before I go into the details of the accident that I explain Locklear's background, because this was not his first time performing these types of stunts. This film, along with the other films that Locklear did during that time, were very famous for the plane stunts that were riddled within. He'd been doing these types of stunts for years at this point, even doing another film named The Great Air Robbery, where he was just doing crazy stunts. I mean, this guy was a total professional, and you can see this in the stunts that made their way onto film. Most of them went very smoothly, so long as people did what he said. This is where the production team on the Skywayman movie failed. They didn't do what the very experienced professional had asked. In order to put Locklear's stunt plane experience to use, the film was to feature an aerial chase scene that would lead up to Locklear doing the death-defying tailspin move. For those who are unaware, a tailspin is probably one of the hardest things you could do in a stunt plane, especially back then with the older planes they were using. It's already a hard task to do, and while Locklear was getting ready to perform the stunt, he had one request made to the production team. He requested that when he was doing the tailspin move, that the production team shut off the big studio lights that were glaring on him in order for him to be able to see where he was going. Armour Locklear, with the plane experience that he had, knew for a fact if he ended the move with the studio lights on, he wouldn't be able to know exactly where he's flying to, and it would most likely result in a crash, which is unfortunately exactly what happened. It was pretty simple instructions to just turn off the lights, and they didn't do that. Locklear and his flying partner Milton Elliott flew in the air, and a bunch of spectators below watched this entire thing go down. In the crowd was Viola Dana, who was in a relationship with Locklear during the time of this movie, and she detailed how when Locklear and Elliott went for the tailspin move, they did not turn the studio lights off, causing Locklear to fly blind and drive directly into an oil sump, which from my understanding is one of these big oil tanks. And the plane that was used was one of these, a Curtiss JN Jenny, which is notorious for being fragile. You crash while flying one of these, and there's basically no hope of surviving. Viola knew that these planes were super fragile, so when she saw the plane crash in the way that it did, she immediately, on instinct, started running toward Locklear. And this is where the story goes from already pretty horrific to just really, really depressing. The people that were on set grabbed hold of her and forced her to go home. If you don't believe me, here's Viola Dana herself explaining what happened when she saw the crash.
And he said to the director, he said, now when I get down to the level of the oil wells, take the lights off me, the sunlight arcs. Take those lights off me and I'll know where I am. I can come out of it. And he went into the tailspin and they never took the lights off him. And of course he into an oil sump. I guess there was practically nothing left of him because those jennies, you know, they're very fragile. Somebody picked me up I started to run for the plane, and somebody said, grab her and take her home. And I guess I was just kind of crazy. I couldn't believe what had happened.
And just like that, one of the greatest pilots to ever grace film was gone. Fox made the decision to capitalize on the crash by rushing the film into production and into a release, using promotional ads like this, which show Locklear standing above a crashed plane. The accident is in the film. And I think that off the bat, Fox knew this was in bad taste. They knew it was terrible to do what they did, to even release the film, so they tried making up for it by giving 10% of the profits to the families of Armour Locklear and Milton Elliott, who were the two pilots that ended up dying in the crash. Now, it was nice of them to do that, but I don't know, something about this entire donation just screams, yeah, we messed up, but we're hoping this small donation will make up for it. And I don't know, it doesn't feel sincere, and I don't know, it could have been, it so could have easily been avoided. Just shut the lights off, you know, almost. And I can only assume they kept the lights on. Because they wanted to get a good shot. Similar to like the John Landis incident with Twilight Zone, this dude wanted to get an amazing shot, and it cost the life of an actor. And Skywayman, they wanted to get a good shot of the tailspin, and it cost the life of an amazing actor. it's crazy what these corporations are able to get away with by just throwing money at people. And I don't know, just let me know your opinion below on this, because I really didn't know what to make of the aftermath of the situation. On the one hand, I'm upset that it happened, and on the other hand, it was still somewhat decent of them to give money to the families, but I don't know, nothing is gonna replace those people's lives. So let me know what you guys think below. Shark is a 1969 action film about a man named Kane that helps aid in treasure hunting via diving into shark-infested waters. At least, that's what the title of the movie would like you to think. You see, the original title of this film was Kane with an exclamation point, not Shark with an exclamation point. And it was directed by Samuel Fuller, who had a specific vision for the film that was never fully realized because of an on-set accident that supposedly occurred when filming the scenes involving sharks. There is a lot of controversy surrounding the shark incident, but not just around the actual incident itself, but the validity of it. A lot of people seem to think that the supposed shark attack that was caught on film is actually a hoax that was used in order to promote the film, and I promise that I will get to that, but I want to tell the original story as it was promoted in magazines when the film was coming out. Supposedly, a stuntman named Jose Marco was helping film in Isla Mujeres when one of the sharks got loose and attacked him on camera, causing Marco to end up in the hospital and lose his life several hours later because of the injury sustained. There are a lot of details that get muddled up and changed depending on who you talk to and who you ask, but some say the shark broke out of its protective netting. Others have explained that the shark just wasn't sedated enough, and that's why it was conscious enough for this attack to occur. And some have even commented on the movie that is somehow all fully on YouTube, explaining that Jose Marco wasn't a real thing and that this whole thing was a publicity stunt for the movie. And yeah, that's the disgusting part if this were true. Remember earlier how I explained the movie was supposed to be named Kane? Well, the story goes that the studio changed the name from Kane to Shark, and all of the promotion for the movie was then changed to how someone died during the making of the movie. And within the first few seconds of the film, the live attack that was supposedly caught on film is shown to the audience. And Life magazine ran with this story, publishing it and explaining how a film named Shark was coming out that had a live death on screen within the first few seconds. So this movie was pretty much just being blown up because of the fact that it had supposedly a live death in it. However, this does appear to be a hoax, or at least there's evidence of it. What you're seeing on screen may in fact be fake, but the problem is the evidence comes in the form of an old magazine. There's an old magazine named Skin Diver magazine, and specifically the issue from November 1969. In that magazine, there is an article called The Great Shark Hoax that goes over all the details of how this is simply a publicity stunt. If you look this up yourself right now on the internet, the only information you will be able to find is what I'm about to say. A man named Dewey Bergman claimed that he was unable to find any record of the attack, getting statements from local authorities, even getting a statement from Life, which is the company that published the images of the shark, stating that the story may have been a hoax, concluding that the photographs published in Life for the movie had to be conjured up through special effects. Now, I could have done the easy thing as a YouTuber and just left it at that. You guys got your morbid curiosity, and I mean, I got a video out of it. But I always go the extra mile. I managed to track down on eBay the specific issue with this article in it. Skin Diver magazine, November 1969. I actually went and bought this. I found the exact magazine. It says it right here. Shark Hoax Exposed. And as said before, on page 32, The Great Shark Hoax, 3 pages chock full of information regarding the shark incident and why it's a hoax. And this guy basically proved that it was in fact fake. So what Dewey Bergman did essentially was he got to Isla Mujeres, which is where it's rumored that this shark attack happened. And he talked to a lot of people there. He talked to the locals that lived there. And keep in mind, the population size was like 1,000. It wasn't even that big during this time. So it was a pretty small knit town. No one that lived there said that this shark attack happened. No one at the only hospital that was there said the shark attack happened. And no one that trained people at the scuba diving school, none of the instructors, none of the people that were actually out in the water all the time said that they ever saw anyone get attacked by a shark. In fact, a lot of people there were even saying that there was not even any shark sightings for months or even years. So for this to have happened and gone under the nose of every single person living there, just crazy. And it basically exposes this whole thing and begs the question, like, did they just come down here, say that they filmed this scene there, and then just lie about it and get it promoted in Life magazine? And Dewey Bergman even calls the magazine out. He had several shark experts examine the pictures and examine the way that the shark moved, the way the shark looked, the color and everything. And what the shark experts found out was that it was almost like they had a dead shark on set and they threw it at the guy and then just used like a bunch of fake blood and ketchup to mess with the surrounding area to make it look like a shark attack. And you know, this isn't published, so what I ended up doing, actually, I'm gonna leave a link below. I'm gonna scan these pages and leave them for people to see, because it's honestly a great story that this guy put together. And he interviewed several people just to prove this one thing. And it's crazy because, like, you know, you think, you know, why is someone going so hard for this incident? But he details in the article that this one little shark incident actually affected the island a lot. Like, it kind of messed with their economy a little bit. The hotel wasn't able to get as many people in because people were scared of the waters. The actual scuba diving school lost like half of their revenue because people weren't signing up anymore. They were too scared to go in the water now. And overall, it's just sad and crazy that this happened. And it's just weird, you know, no one that he interviewed, every single person he talked to, no one had heard of the shark incident. No one had heard of Jose Marco. And it just appears that this just didn't happen at all. And the craziest part to me of all of this is how they determined the shark wasn't real. Because even Life magazine explained that when they had their shark experts look at the photos after they published it, they realized, oh, we made a mistake. And so they sent them a statement back basically saying, you know, it does appear that we have made a mistake and this may as well be a hoax. So I guess that's it. Yeah, Skin Diver magazine. You know, who would have thought that this would kind of put an end to the whole story? Kind of crazy. But that's what I do. I try to at least go the extra mile when it comes to research if I can. I feel like a lot of people think that I'm lazy with research. I try not to be. But yeah, this was a super cool read. Shout out to the guy who sold this to me. Why would you hold on to this? It's so random to have this magazine. But yeah, it came in handy. It came in super clutch for this video. The original Friday the 13th from 1980 is considered to be an absolute classic in the horror space because of its influence on the slasher genre, with many of the classic elements and tropes that people associate with horror starting in the original Friday the 13th. The film never shied away from any of the graphic and gruesome visuals that were all brought to life thanks to the amazing cast and crew that worked on the movie, with some of the practical effects being brought a little too close to real life. There is a part of the movie where one of the characters named Alice goes looking for her friend Bill. She unexpectedly finds Bill pinned to the door with an arrow going through his body and his eye. Call me a fanboy all you want, but I think this visual effect still holds up, and it's most likely because what you're seeing on screen really is the actor that played Bill being hoisted up against the door with an arrow attached to his eye. Now, obviously he's not dead, and obviously it's not a real arrow going through his eye. But with all the prosthetics and stuff, it looks real. But that real look came with the price. The makeup artist that brought this effect to life was named Tom Savini. And it was Savini who came up with the formula for the fake blood that he used on Harry Crosby, who is the actor that played Bill. And things were fine. You know, everything seemed to be going according to plan. The prosthetics and everything went on great. It looked awesome. But what the crew did not know was that the formula that Savini used on Harry Crosby contained an ingredient known as photo flow. And for those of you like me who are just absolutely clueless to what photo flow really is. Photo flow is a wetting agent that is primarily used on real pieces of film to minimize watermarks or streaks when developing said film. It really was just a consumer product that people would use on film at home, or people on set would use to clean up film that they used for movies or whatnot. And it was definitely not meant to be used as fake blood. But no one understood the effects that this ingredient could have on someone until the scene was finished. So leading up to this scene, the blood was applied to Harry Crosby's face, they planted the arrow into his eye with a little bit of blood in there, and everything was going according to plan. They shot the scene, it came out great, and what you see shot is what ended up in the film. But when they finished filming and they took all the prosthetics off, Harry Crosby was in excruciating pain. This obviously caused a panic, and Crosby kept exclaiming that he was in so much pain and that he couldn't see anything. Because Savini used photo flow as an ingredient, it caused Crosby to be blinded for nearly 6 months from the time the scene was filmed until after. This was definitely a better outcome than most of the other on-set accidents we've gone over in the series. This one did remind me though of the Clockwork Orange incident that we went over in part 1 to the film accident series. And 100% of the blame definitely goes to Tom Savini, the person who used photo flow in this blood formula. In the third installment to the Transformers series, there was a freak accident that changed the life of an extra on set when a stunt went horribly wrong. 24-year-old Gabriela Cedillo was one of 80 extras on set of Transformers: The Dark of the Moon, with all of the extras being used for a specific action sequence of the film. Now this stunt was a little weird, and that's me speaking from my experience researching all of these accidents. So while they were filming in Hammond, Indiana, they had a scene with a bunch of cars. The crew needed a ton of vehicles, and the solution they came up with was to offer all of the extras an extra $25 per day of shooting if they used their own personal vehicles for the shot. And one of the extras that agreed to this $25 extra a day while using their own personal vehicle was Gabriela Cedillo. And everything seemed normal until they informed Gabriela that they were going to be using her personal car in a stunt for the film. Her own personal Toyota vehicle was going to be used for an extra $25. Like, that's already crazy. And sources that were on set have expressed that nobody was really informed of the risks involved with this stunt. They tried to make it seem very casual, that they were just going to use her car for this stunt. From what I've been able to read, it appears that the stunt involved a stunt car of some sorts being pulled or pulling Gabriela's vehicle, and this was done with the use of a towing cable and a certified welder, like welding something to one of the cars so that it would pull it more efficiently. It's not really clear exactly what the stunt was. All that we know was that this was the damage done to what I believe was Gabriela's Toyota Scion. The towing cable snapped, causing all of this damage to the car, and reportedly took 1/3 of Gabriela's head with it. And she lived. She fought through and managed to live after this entire experience. And this is a little unlike the other accidents that we've gone over. And that's because, at least on paper, this was a true accident. Most of the other accidents that we've talked about, there was some kind of malpractice involved. Either the stunt was way too dangerous and stunt crew came out and expressed that they shouldn't do it and they were just ignored, leading to an accident, or somebody just didn't do their safety precaution checks. But that was not the case with the Transformers incident. And I'm only including this to tell the full story of what happened. Even after hearing the full story, I still 100% side with Gabriela, and you will definitely understand why in a minute. So again, the crew did in fact do what was required of them. They hired a certified welder on set that performed all of the necessary safety precautions leading up to this stunt going wrong. And here is where the really sad part of the story comes in. So because legally They did everything in their power to prevent this accident from happening. They were not liable for this, and they chose to not pay a single dime for Gabriella and her medical bills. They basically left her to fend for herself when it came to this problem. All of her medical bills came out of her own pocket, her own healthcare, and some public aid that she managed to get. And that was the story for a while. She got screwed over and was left to deal with everything on her own. And these injuries were serious. She required brain surgery. The entire left side of her body ended up being paralyzed because of it, and she was just left hopeless with a mountain of bills to pay. If it wasn't for another controversy attacking the same film in the same year, Gabriella would not have had any kind of happy resolution. The other controversy came in the form of a guerrilla-style video that was shot and posted online of a crash that happened on set of the Transformers Dark of the Moon. The video shows a Transformers 3 stunt car crashing into a real police vehicle as it rushed to a real emergency. This one video gained enough notoriety and surged enough presence that it was a bother to the industry, and it did so in such a way that Gabriella was able to pile on and sue the studio for damages on the grounds of negligence, claiming that Gabriella was hired as an extra and not part of the film's stunt crew, so she should not have even been involved in the stunt in the first place. And this is why you should be siding with Gabriella. She was required to do a stunt on set that she had no business being a part of. She was not hired on to do that. And even so, she was only paid an extra $25 to do this stunt. So they underpaid her, and at the very least, when things went wrong, you would expect them to come up and pay for her medical bills. But they didn't do that. They sat back and decided that just because they did all of their safety checks, that it wasn't their concern anymore. And it just goes to show how cutthroat these companies are and how they view people. And I don't know if it's because this story is just so old, or if the company doesn't want people to see any evidence of it, but finding the footage of this crash, because it does exist, was extremely hard. There seems to be no footage of the damage done to Gabriella's car, but you can see in this video the white stunt car skidding across the ground. If you're watching the screen and wondering, where you're supposed to look, you can see the car right here after the fact sliding across the street. And again, this is what the damage looked like after the fact. It's just absolutely insane that this happened, and it was even more insane that they tried to get out of paying her medical bills. So let me know your thoughts on this one below, and if I'm being too harsh or whatnot. I just feel like I've gone over so many of these stories where these executives and companies are just trying to get out of doing the decent thing. With all that said, let's just move on to the next film accident. This is a rather interesting case because it's one where both sides of the story claim that the other is lying. The claim for this one is that while making The Hobbit, which came out in 2012, over 27 animals were harmed and killed as part of the process. And it isn't just that simple. The claims were very descriptive, stating that a horse gashed its legs open on an unsafe fence, some of the goats froze to death, and several chickens were left without protection, leading them to getting mauled by dogs, with other animals contracting worms, dying from bad feed, and just all around a ton of negligence. All of these claims came from two wranglers that were confirmed to be employees and working on the set of The Hobbit. The wranglers escalated the situation to the AHA, the American Humane Association, who leveled claims against the Hobbit production. And the production was very quick to respond. A rep that spoke for the director, Peter Jackson, explained that there were in fact 2 incidents involving 2 deaths of horses that were avoidable, but they completely denied the accusation of the other 27 animals that died due to mistreatment, further explaining that they poured hundreds of thousands of dollars to improve the conditions of the animals in early 2011 when production was high. And if you watch the movie, you will see one of those disclaimers that says no animals were harmed in the filming of this movie. And all of this starts to make a lot more sense when you find out that the 2 wranglers who claimed this were part of the Hobbit production, but after a year in, no longer worked there. So in my mind, when I got to this part of the story, I immediately thought like, okay, so 2 random workers were let go from the Hobbit production and they were mad, they were angry. So in order to get back at Warner Brothers, they leveled all of these crazy accusations against them. And as said before, it was done as a way to get back at Warner Brothers for firing them. And then the clap back from Peter Jackson almost convinced me. It almost made me think, okay, so this is the full story. But then I did some more digging and I found out that the 2 wranglers were not fired. They chose to leave. They quit. And that changes up the entire story. So they explained that they saw the conditions of the animals and didn't want any part of it, choosing to step away from the production. And the disclaimer that you see in the movie is very literal. No animals were harmed during the filming of this movie. And in Hollywood, that means if the cameras were not rolling when the accident took place, then no one was harmed during the filming. Literally, right? The cameras aren't rolling. There's nothing filming. So if all of these accidents took place without the camera on, then they could make that claim. They could literally convince the masses by putting that in the movie. This disclaimer: no animals were harmed during the filming of this movie, instead of the making of this movie, which is a humongous difference, right? That little asterisk is very important. And this does seem to be what happened, because when the American Humane Association did their investigation later on that year, they ended up giving them a passing grade, but they also noted that they were giving them a passing grade based on the on-set conditions, and that the animals' housing facilities were in fact subpar. And most of these claims, at least from what I've read, were kind of about the housing facilities. You know, the horse cut its leg open on an old fence. Some of them were given bad feed, bad food, and they got like bad diseases and whatnot, and that killed the animals. So a lot of these claims were made against the living conditions as opposed to things that the animals were made to do while the film was being made. This is Ray from the future. So I just noticed while editing this that I did not talk about what exactly happened to the animals after the fact, because you will see in a lot of the articles that it states animals did not die on set, and that is true. The animals did pass away later when they were returned back to some of the owners. So the point I was trying to make here was essentially they can't prove that the on-set conditions contributed to the animals dying later on, but it is most likely the reason as to why those animals passed away. Okay, let's let Past Ray get back to talking about this. And based on all of that, I can only believe that the 2 wranglers were telling the truth, but the burden of evidence is what led to them just being kind of swept under the rug. They can't prove that these things happened due to poor living conditions of the facilities, so there's no real way to fight this in court. You know, it's mostly just hearsay. And I still want to make it clear, this is just my speculation. There is no confirmed source that has come out explaining all of this. I'm just trying to read between the lines and come up with what I think is the real story. And I think that that's the truth. The sources are out there for you to find, and I think the ones that I read led me to exactly what I showed everyone here. This is a unique story in that it's the earliest known film accident that has ever been recorded, and it's a pretty obscure one at that. So Across the Border from 1914 is an American short film about a man named Curly Smith who ends up uncovering a band of smugglers, leading him to getting injured, falling in love with one of the smugglers' daughters, and yada yada yada. I know you all didn't come here for a summary of that movie, but just to set the scene for this section, this is one of those old Western type movies that also happens to be a silent short film. The screenshots that I'm showing are what I believe to be the only screenshots available of the film, mostly because it's an obscure one and it's over 100 years old. The female lead for this movie was played by Grace McHugh, who was the person that was involved in this accident. And one of the scenes that she was required to shoot was a scene with a boat. And I gotta admit, when I was researching this one, I was struggling to understand the conditions of the set, right? One of the questions that I kept asking myself when reading this entire story was, why were they so unprepared? Like, why was Grace McHugh almost left on this boat by herself. There was no like team ready to spring into action if something happened. This was a question that I kept asking myself while I was researching this story. The scene that I think was supposed to happen, because I haven't been able to watch the film anywhere, I believe there was a river and Grace McHugh was put in a boat on the river, and all she had to do was simply cross the river on this boat. And the film crew appeared to be filming a good distance away from her while this scene was happening. But in my opinion, I feel like this whole sequence, this entire situation was just asking for disaster to happen, because based on what ended up occurring, they just were not ready for any type of water accident to happen. And before I explain what happened to Grace McHugh, because I will get there and it's not at all what any of you are expecting, but before I explain all that, I feel at this point I should make it abundantly clear that this is 1914. It's very important to keep in mind the time period that this situation happened in, because safe practices and on-set regulations really were just not a thing at this point in time. You have to remember, this was pre-code Hollywood. This was 20 years before the motion picture production code would even be put into place. And it would be nearly 6 years before any type of real crazy public disaster involving an actor would shake up the industry. And the case I'm talking about with that is the Harold Lloyd incident, where he accidentally lit a bomb that exploded, taking his hand with it. Cases like that, and this series in general, have led to me questioning, when did Hollywood start executing safe practices on set? And it was this line of logic that led to a quite shocking, and I guess in hindsight, pretty obvious discovery. You see, I always thought that if I cared enough to look into it, I would be able to find a set point in time where Hollywood decided to get their shit together and create a safety code that could be used on every film set. But I could not find that while researching for this. I could not find a defining moment where that happened. And this is because everything that you have all been watching, every single accident, every single malpractice from cast and crew, and every single on-set disaster that resulted in death is the safety code. Each time one of these film disasters happens and it's brought to court, these companies, these big production companies, are forced into a corner, right? Like, of course, they can just choose to keep doing business as usual and they could just keep filming stuff and ignore it. And I'm sure that's what they want, right? That's the optimal play for the production company. But because these accidents have happened, and because courts can now look back and point to an abundance of any of the infamous on-set disasters, if any similar accident occurs on any set going forward, that production company will now be held liable. And they'll be held liable on the grounds of not practicing safety precautions, leading to unwanted lawsuits, which will result in them for sure losing. So it's in their best interest every time these accidents happen to prevent them, because they don't want to get sued, right? We've seen this in the Transformers case. They didn't want to pay Gabriella's medical bills, and they took the opportunity that arose to say, look, you know, we're not liable. We did all the precautions, right? Why are we going to pay your medical bills when we don't have to? They will only ever do the right thing when they are forced to do the right thing. And because Across the Border took place in 1914, there had yet to be any type of real on-set safety for all types of situations. This was a time before they had all of this information to go off of to provide the best care for their cast and crew. And I'm sure that on the set of Across the Border, they did have staff that was ready to tend to cuts, bruises, or injuries. And I'm sure they probably had even like a team ready to go in case of an emergency. But this was a time where they didn't know what could potentially happen. And it's this lack of information to go off of that led to this tragic incident. And this brings us full circle back to where we were earlier. Grace McHugh on the boat. So what ended up happening was, as they were filming the boat crossing the river, the boat inexplicably capsized. It began sinking, which led to Grace McHugh nearly drowning in the water below. It was at that point that a cameraman named Owen Carter tried his best to rescue her, immediately jumping into the river without any hesitation. And this guy at first was doing an amazing job. He managed to swim them both back to shore, and the two were laid down relaxing on what appeared to be a sandbar, which, if you don't know, is one of these little patches or mounds of sand, almost like a mini island, if you will. And that's where Owen managed to bring Grace and himself to after the boat capsized. Only there was one issue that nobody could have foresaw. Where Owen and Grace were relaxing, where they were trying to catch their breath on, was not a sandbar. What Owen and everyone else on set thought was a sandbar turned out to be quicksand, which slowly but surely caused Owen Carter and Grace McHugh to sink away from everyone's view, getting sucked down by the quicksand, with their bodies not turning up for nearly a week. Owen was found 5 days later, and Grace was found 12 days later, 9 miles away from the set. And just like some of the other accidents, they used her death to advertise the movie, stating, "This film is one of the greatest Mexican war features in which Miss Grace McHugh, the beautiful and daring leading lady, lost her life." Just disgusting on their part to even do that, and worse is that Owen Carter was not really recognized for his efforts. And the only time that I saw him being recognized was from this little snippet that you're seeing on screen, which I think is the only time that any kind of outlet recognized what Owen Carter did that day. I was also not able to find any evidence that there was any type of compensation to the families, but for all I know, it could have happened, and it's just not easily findable or written down somewhere. Regardless, this was a tragedy. And the only silver lining here with this film, along with many of the others that we've gone over, is that in a way they were trailblazers for these types of precautions to be taken on every film set as of now. It just pains me to know that these things most likely could not have been prevented, because no one really expects these situations to happen unless they are like painfully obvious, like the Twilight Zone incident. So while it's really hard to hear about these events taking place leading up to now, it's part of history, and I guess all we can really do with this information is take it into account, and then when the same situation inevitably comes up again, we will be better prepared and equipped to manage the problem before it ends up on one of my videos. The Abyss was released in 1989 and had its fair share of problems, specifically concerning possible drownings on set. Going into the filming of this movie, it was quite ambitious what director James Cameron was trying to accomplish. He wanted all the underwater sequences to really be filmed underwater. Ed Harris, who played the main male lead, nearly drowned while filming one of the underwater sequences. The scene in question is when Ed Harris's character, Bud, has to take on a 2-mile underwater excursion. In the movie, they explain that the only way to make this journey is for Bud to use this newly created liquid that will allow him to breathe underwater for a lot longer and survive a journey that deep. And what you're seeing on screen is completely practical. They really did fill up his helmet with water like this just to film the scene. To their production team's credit, they ran this one through vigorous testing out the effect in shallow waters first, and even putting Ed Harris's stunt double through the stunt multiple times just to make sure that everything would go as planned. Now when it came to doing the actual stunt, the scene would involve Ed Harris being forcefully pulled on a cable along the side of this wall, which would be filmed to look as though he was diving further into the depths of the water. In reality, he was just on his side sliding across the wall. Now, should anything go wrong, it was up to Ed Harris to signal to his team to come to him and give him some air. They even designed his helmet with this procedure in mind. The helmet was made with a latch on it, which is not really practical for actual scuba diving because then water would leak in, but obviously it was needed for the stunt. Now the mishap came when the crewmate that was supposed to give him his regulator, which is, the mouthpiece that allows scuba divers to breathe, he gave it to him upside down. So when Ed Harris went to take a big old breath, he got half air, half water. This caused his lungs to immediately fill up with water. Now to explain why Ed Harris did what he did next and not just panic and get help, I have to explain that everyone on set was trained to scuba dive properly. And one of the things they teach you is to purge the regulator. Now this is because sometimes the regulators, at least to my knowledge, based on the procedure, can be filled with water sometimes. So there's usually a button on the regulator to shoot the water out and then leaving just air for you to breathe in. So he thought that he forgot to purge the regulator. So he pressed the button and a bunch of water shot out, and he was like, okay, cool. So he went to go take another breath from the regulator. Now because it was upside down, obviously it wasn't just because he needed to purge it. So when he took another breath, the same exact thing happened. He got half air, half water. Now at this point he just started panicking, because who wouldn't, right? I mean, you're underwater, there's an entire crew set just watching you drown, and there's not really a good way to signal this. You already have someone with you that is supposed to be giving you air, so any movement that out of the ordinary wouldn't look too suspicious, especially because you're with someone who is supposed to be taking care of you. In fact, the only reason that Ed Harris is still alive to this day is because another crewmate who was a scuba diver recognized what was happening and gave Ed Harris an actual regulator, swimming up to him, ripping the old one out, and allowing him to breathe successfully. And what's even worse is Ed Harris's explanation of the situation, because he said that when he called cut, he was already wanting to gasp for air. So when he got the original regulator that was upside down, I can just imagine the sense of relief he was hoping to have, and then just having it not be that is just truly a horrific situation to find yourself in, but not nearly as horrific as what happened to James Cameron on the same exact set. In the situation with Ed Harris, he was lucky enough to have the luxury of people on the crew watching him at all times. In fact, every single actor that did scenes underwater had at least one trained diver paying very close attention to them for any sign of drowning or malfunctioning equipment. And should anything happen, that trained scuba diver that was assigned to them would go up to them and get them either up to the water or give them the regulator to breathe. Because James Cameron was an experienced scuba diver starting at the age of 17, no one on set, including himself, felt there was any reason for him to have his own trained diver paying attention to him. Or at least that's, what they thought at the time of production. Obviously, we're telling the story for a reason. So this tiny oversight nearly caused Cameron to drown himself during a day of filming. What happened was his oxygen tank had ran out and everyone was busy setting up the underwater scene. So the only way he was able to get someone's attention was through an underwater PA system, which looks something like this. For these underwater PA systems to work, there has to be someone within the range to hear you. The only person that was within range of Cameron during this, incident was the underwater director of photography, Al Giddings. Now, a little fun fact about Al Giddings that Cameron had forgot in the moment was that Giddings was deaf. He had become deaf from another diving accident on another set. This left James Cameron to struggle alone until another diver noticed what was going on. And much like the Ed Harris situation, there was a problem with the regulator. Only this time it wasn't because the regulator was upside down. There was actually a rip in the diaphragm of the regulator, causing any attempt at air to be filled completely with water, which Cameron took 2 big breaths of. Again, thinking his first attempt was bad due to not purging it, he purged the system, salt water came out, and this led to a second mouthful of water. And the scariest part of this entire situation was yet to happen. Cameron understood what was going to happen. He understood that the only plan of escape at this point was to make a break for the surface. So that's what he did. The only problem was the trained scuba diver held him in place and wouldn't let Cameron go. This is because in diving situations like this, your first instinct if you're panicking and you're underwater is to swim up as fast as you can to the surface. But if you do that, it can lead to its own complications, specifically something called air embolism. Now, because trained scuba divers know about this, they are trained to not let you swim up to the surface super fast like that. So he was just slowly rising with Cameron. But again, at this point, Cameron was literally like gasping for air underwater. So he was trying to get the basically chance his life. He knows, I'm not going to make it slowly rising up to the water. I need to just chance it, and if I die going up too fast, I die going up too fast. I want to die either way. But the scuba diver doesn't understand the situation that well, so he's holding him down in place. So that's the situation at this point, is Cameron is gasping for air. Imagine you're underwater, you need to take a breath as fast as you can, and someone is literally holding you down, making sure you don't do that. So Cameron did the only thing that he could do, which was punch the guy in the face that would let him go, and then he swam up to the surface and took a big old breath of air. So thankfully he is still alive and didn't experience air embolism, which again, if you go up too fast, if you surface too fast, you could actually cause the air in your bloodstream to expand and you would faint and die. So he made it, but it was just absolutely terrifying researching this story. I just can't imagine being that far underwater where I can't just, you know, kick my feet off the pool ground and get a big breath of air. Like, just imagine that, like the like hundreds of feet that they were, I don't even know how deep they were in the water, but I imagine if it was like this, they had to have been like at least like 50 feet to 100 feet underwater filming this stuff. It's just crazy to think about not being able to immediately breathe. It's your natural instinct to want to do that. So it's just absolutely terrifying, especially with someone holding you down, not letting you go. It's just, ugh. During the filming of Where Eagles Dare, released in 1968, there exists a scene in which Darren Nesbitt's character, Von Hapen, takes a bullet to the chest and face. The sequence entailed Darren Nesbitt having balloons full of blood on his chest that would explode when the blanks were shot. He explained in an interview that they had done over 4 takes with different jackets needing to be worn each time because obviously the fake blood would get everywhere in between these takes. It was during take 5 that something unexpected happened. When the balloons exploded this time, he describes that it looked like he had been hit by a bazooka, with all the fake blood trailing into his eyes along with other shrapnel from the explosion. This incident actually caused him to go blind for nearly 2 weeks, but thankfully he did eventually regain his full eyesight, which is a fate that I think most would be happy with when it comes to accidents like these. Just a short entry on this video, but nonetheless a potentially deadly accident that turned out okay for the victim. Conqueror, released in 1956, is home to one of the strangest on-set occurrences probably in the history of Hollywood. It's reported that out of a 220-member cast, over 91 of them ended up developing some kind of cancer, with 46 of them passing away due to the illness. When I first read this story, my immediate first thought was, well, it's cancer. You know, cancer is the second leading cause of death behind heart disease, so it makes sense that the cast members of a crew this size would develop that eventually, especially considering the fact that every article that I've read on it explains how the cancer didn't happen right away. It was, you know, happened after a couple of decades after the filming of the movie. I would expect people on set to grow old and accrue cancer due to, you know, bad living habits, and chalk this up to just a big coincidence. But that's what's really weird about this, is it's not just a coincidence. The sample size of this is what's strange. Once you are above the age of 54, cancer can only really be found in 1 in every 100 people. And in this case, it's nearly 91 out of 220, which is very clearly an outlier and an indicator of something else on set happening. So a lot of people have investigated further, and apparently the entire set had been downwind of a nuclear testing site. So during the filming of The Conqueror, the entire cast and crew was constantly breathing in this toxic air and touching the surrounding area, which had also been contaminated. So this is probably what led to this insane peak in this illness in this one small concentrated group. Now, to be fair, the cast and crew were notified of this before they even stepped foot on set at all. They were assured not just by the directors and leading executives of the production team, but by the federal government. That's right, the federal government stepped in before the filming of this and assured everybody on set that it was in fact safe to film there. So where did it all go wrong? Well, it's because no one knew about the nearby snow canyon, which was the actual source of the radiation. They were too focused on an atomic bombing testing site that was a few hundred miles away from where they were filming. So throughout the entire production, they had no idea that they were constantly being exposed to fallout radiation. The extremely tragic part of the story, aside from the many people who lost their lives due to being on this film, decades after, is the uncredited producer, Howard Hughes, who is stated to have spiraled after learning of what happened to everybody, because obviously this was not his intention when producing the film. And this is something that is in drastic contrast to many of the other accidents I've gone over in my 8 videos on the subject. Most of the time, and I guess I'm going to spoil some of the other videos saying this, but you'll see that many of the other accidents I talk about in my original series are mostly caused due to carelessness on whoever is directing or producing the film, which is exactly the case in our next story. Cannonball Run, released in 1981, tells us the story of a few teams participating in a cross-country car race with seemingly little to no rules. They race on the ocean, the air, and obviously on the road. In one scene, we see the film's iconic Aston Martin racing down a two-way road. The car then takes on opposing traffic and weaves through it to make it to the other side. Now, the initial take of this stunt is presumably what made the final cut, because during take 2 of this stunt, the driver crashed straight into another car, causing stuntwoman Heidi Von Beltz to fly at the windshield and become paralyzed from the neck down. This accident was mostly caused due to the carelessness of the director, Hal Needham. It was his doing that made this stunt so dangerous, starting with the car that was used in the stunt. The car that we see in the film doing this stunt was not the actual Aston Martin that was used in majority of the film. It was a totally different car that was modeled to just look like the Aston Martin, only there were a few apparent issues that the director knew about prior to filming. The steering was reportedly defective, the car had bald tires, a malfunctioning clutch, and there were no seatbelts. And according to the court document, which details all of what I just said, it explained that Needham did claim to delay filming to repair the car, but this was disputed in court. During the trial, they disputed these claims. Experts have explained that had there just been, at the very least, seatbelts, he didn't even need to fix the other 3 problems. If there had just been seatbelts, Heidi's injuries would have gone from her being paralyzed from the neck down to just maybe a few fractured bones, which still isn't great, but at the very least, it's the best of 2 bad situations. And again, what's really gross about this entire situation was the director's failing to install the seatbelts. He was told a few times that it would only take 20 minutes or less to do so, but they opted out of it because they wanted to save a few bucks. It's just insane behavior. Now, this is just one of 2 big reasons why this happened. The other reason is Hal Needham changing up the stunt last minute right before they did the second take. So not only did they have a bad car going into the stunt, but he also changed up the entire routine of what the stunt was supposed to be right before they filmed it a second time. So the plan for the stunt was for the Aston Martin to drive and dodge the oncoming traffic like you see in the film. This would be accomplished by the stunt driver in the Aston Martin taking a very specific path that would keep them a safe distance from all the other cars, but they would film it in such a way that it would look as though he's bobbing and weaving through the cars. But they wanted to make it safe, so they chose to make it safe. Now the director, seeing this on camera, didn't feel as though it was believable. Now keep in mind, this is what you see in the film, and I think for the time it was very believable. The second time they filmed it, because he didn't like the way the first take came out, he wanted the car to actually bob and weave through the traffic. Again, instead of wanting the driver to stay a safe distance away from the oncoming cars, he now wanted them to dodge and weave in a serpentine fashion, and he wanted to make the driver drive faster than he already was. All of this in a broken vehicle. So in the vehicle while the stunt was happening, there was a few people. There was the stunt driver, a special effects person that was in charge of making like a smoke machine go off, and what I would call the main person in the story, Heidi von Beltz, who was assisting the special effects person. Now, no one told Heidi about the change, and so she was not ready to brace herself for this new path that the driver was taking. They were going around 50 miles per hour, allegedly, and despite planning an escape route, stunt driver Nickerson realized that he wasn't going to make it out of this in one piece, trying his best to take the escape route, but they ended up colliding with the Ford van in front of them, causing him and Heidi to be hospitalized. Now, from what I can make out, the stunt driver ended up recovering, but Heidi von Beltz was now paralyzed from the neck down. Thankfully, she was able to successfully sue and settled in court for over $7 million, but it's also assumed that most of this money went to paying her lawyers and her massive medical bills. So you'd think after this experience that Heidi would have just, gave up on life, but this woman is amazing. Not only did she not let this get her down, but she wrote a book detailing about her entire experience. And in her book, My Sole Purpose, you get a feel for how she felt about the incident. And I gotta say, her attitude towards the situation had me in utter awe. She expressed how the doctors told her she had months to live and didn't give up, writing, "My doctors said I wouldn't live until Christmas and that I would never move again. My story is about beating the odds, triumphing over adversity. I have a burden and so does everyone. Whether it's physical or emotional or financial or whatever, I have what people call a disability. But in some sense, everyone does. Frankly, if it had been up to me, I would have picked one a little less extreme, but no one asked. The important thing to remember is you are only as disabled as you think you are." Just wow. I can't fathom having such an amazing outlook on life given the situation, and against all odds, she did live for another 30 plus years until she passed away in 2015. And a lot of the articles I've read have described her as always being in high spirits no matter the situation, and just being an absolute gem of a person to be around, and I can see why. So let me know your thoughts below on the story, because I was blown away reading about Heidi's life and the aftermath that followed. During the filming of The Cruel Sea, released in 1953, there was a close call with another case of a possible drowning on set. Only this time, it wasn't due to any kind of mishap with scuba diving gear. Donald Sinden, who plays Lockhart in the film, was in the middle of filming this scene where the crew was to evacuate the ship by jumping off the side. Now, the entire story from his perspective has been laid out and can be found on pages 196 to 197 of his book, A Touch of Memoirs. Here he writes that he was asked by an assistant director if he could swim or not, to which he replied no. Now, the director thought he was being sarcastic, so he simply replied back with where he wanted Donald Sinden to jump from. He said, go jump from over there. Now, if you're wondering why Donald Sinden didn't say anything, why didn't he push back a little bit and say, no, I really can't swim, it's because of a misunderstanding. He figured that there was a shallow end to this entire tank of water, as it was only 10 feet deep. He thought maybe the director was telling him to go to this specific spot of the boat to jump from, because maybe this was like a 4 feet deep area that he could stand up in after. As you can tell from the story being in this video, that was not the case. So Donald put himself into position where the director told him to do so, as 2 giant wave machines were turned on to simulate thrashing water, and the scene was put into action. Now, from an interview, Donald explains that he knew he couldn't swim. No matter how hard he tried growing up, he just didn't know how to. And it turns out that he suffers from something called negative buoyancy, which literally means he sinks faster than the average person in water. This meant when they called action and Donald jumped into the water, he sank. He simply sank far deep into the water. Despite his attempts at doing the best breaststroke that he could do, he just couldn't make any progress against the wave machines. Had it not been for Jack Hawkins, who overheard someone asking where's Donald, he might have been a goner. Hawkins immediately dove in after discovering that Donald was stuck underwater and swam out to pick him up and bring him to safety. Definitely a close call, and something that Donald surprisingly looks back fondly on, despite it being one of the most dangerous situations he's ever found himself in.
I've never been able to swim. And at school I couldn't swim, and people said, but of course you can, everybody can swim. No. Because they are because of negative buoyancy. I'd never heard of this before, negative buoyancy. And if you and I, no, not I, if you are lying in a swimming pool, totally relaxed, no trouble at all, the operative bits are above the surface. Just your knees and feet and toes and mouth is above the surface, just relaxed. But if I do exactly the same thing, I'm 4 inches under the
The death that happened on set of The Right Stuff is a bit of a mystery because there seemed to be nothing that went wrong. The plan for this stunt was to recreate Chuck Yeager's 1963 attempt at breaking the world record for highest altitude. In real life, this feat ended with Yeager being ejected from the plane, and while he was free falling, the seat he was ejected from smashed directly into his helmet, which caused his face to be burned as he was falling. Luckily, Chuck Yeager went on to live from this situation, but the same cannot be said for the stuntman that was chosen to recreate the incident on film. Joseph Leonard Svec was a veteran stuntman in the 1980s, and the details surrounding his death still are not clear. The stunt involved Svec jumping from a plane with a camera operator capturing the entire scene. And while he was free falling, he was to activate a smoke machine that would simulate the burning that the real Yeager went through during his world record attempt. And when the shot was good and the coast was clear, he was to deploy his parachute and land safely on the ground. From what I've read, it seemed as though they did 1 or 2 takes beforehand that seemed to go exactly as planned. Joe would jump, the smoke would start, and he'd land safely, albeit with a lot of coughing afterwards because of the smoke being inhaled. It was during the final take that something strange happened. And this is what I mean when I say the details aren't clear. Some sources from people who appear to have been there on set, or at least knew somebody on set, say that the smoke did go off and may have caused Joe to be knocked unconscious during the freefall. But what is consistent throughout the retellings of the story is that Joseph Leonard Svec never deployed his parachute. He simply fell and fell and fell until... What's weird is that after further investigation, we know that his parachute never failed to open. Even his backups were in proper order, so how did this happen? Well, I'm inclined to believe this forum because it provides the most coherent and plausible explanation, which is the smoke caused Leonard to become unconscious, and this would still be consistent with other parts of the story where people claim that Svek looked unfazed as he was falling, even as he got extremely close to the ground. And just as somebody who can imagine themselves in this position, obviously I've never been in that position before, but if you're not able to hit your parachute or something, like if your parachute is not going off and your backups are not going off, you'd probably be flailing your arms around or panicking. So the fact that he didn't, and he was just completely unfazed as he was falling, it's very telling that he was most likely unconscious, whether it was due to the smoke or maybe somehow he just fainted in midair. But let me know your thoughts below on this story, because it felt weird reading so many different takes on what happened. Some sites even claimed that he never ejected himself from his seat and died that way somehow, even though that wouldn't have even been possible given the circumstances. But yeah. Similar to the set of the Conqueror, the Snow Buddies incident is not an accident like a stunt gone wrong or a prop malfunction, but instead was an issue with the crew hiring puppies that were simply too young to be under film working conditions. This is coming straight from an American Humane Association article that was archived on the Wayback Machine. So initially, 5 puppies died on location during the filming of the movie Snow Buddies. And it's reported that many puppies following this initial 5 also became ill due to being exposed to the parvovirus, which for my dog owners out there should already know too well, because it's one of the first shots that a dog receives. The reason this all happened is because the puppies were brought onto set way too young. The Humane Association at the time required that imported puppies on film sets to be at least 14 weeks old, and the Snow Buddies team brought these puppies in from breeders at the young age of 6 weeks, which highly contributed to the vast cases of illnesses among all the dogs on set. It's estimated that nearly 30 plus dogs had to be removed from set for various illnesses that were contracted. While the team did make sure to have the puppies get their vaccinations checked, they did not wait the allotted window before bringing them on set. When dogs receive their vaccinations, typically they're not supposed to go back to regular activities for around a week, depending on whatever the shot is for. And this is so that they can create enough antibodies to fight off any infection that they might run into. But the Snow Buddies production didn't do that. They allowed these puppies to come in right after being vaccinated, leading to the high number of infected puppies that had to be removed for treatment. All of what I just laid out happened to the first group of puppies that were brought onto the set of Snow Buddies. So obviously, because a lot of these puppies from group 1 had to be taken away for treatment, they got a second group. And you would think that Disney learned from their mistakes with the first group, but they didn't. This all happened again when they brought in the second group of puppies. And the reparations that were done in return, you might ask? The film just didn't receive permission to use the "no animals were harmed" disclaimer. That's seemingly all they had to do. And the worst part is the owners who were never returned their dogs. There are a few articles like this one that explain how several owners of these puppies used on set had to receive the sad news that their dogs were no longer with them, with this individual expressing how he felt duped by the entire Snow Buddies production, which promised to care for the puppies, even stating, "You are assuming that Disney and their production company are going to be taking care of these animals like kings and queens," clearly upset at the fact that they did not uphold their promise. And I would expect the same if I were to give Disney my dogs to use in their film. It's Disney. I mean, with how they treat their park guests, because I am a frequenter of the parks, you've seen it in the Disney icebergs, I feel like there's definitely this image to uphold, like the magic almost. It's just kind of crazy. I guess it's not that crazy. I mean, most people definitely think of Disney as like a very evil company, so this isn't surprising. It's just weird because there's so many people on set that would very clearly be able to speak out about this kind of thing, and that's why we're talking about it right now. It's public information, and it appears as though no big case or lawsuit came of this. I believe that when companies use dogs like this, especially in film, there's always a clause included where they promise to pay back a certain amount of money, which in this case was around $1,000 per puppy not returned. But I don't know, it feels a little weird and wrong to, like, for one, I don't think $1,000 is enough given the circumstances. It's a living thing that someone wants back, obviously. I mean, I'm sure people would feel weird if they didn't get, like, their dog back. Now, obviously not every single person that they were buying from were dog owners. Some of them were dog breeders, but even besides the money, it's just wrong, right? And I think I care more about this because, you know, it's a puppy. It's not like the puppies know what's going on, but let me know what you think below. One man and a helicopter blade. In a video like this, that sentence should horrify you, but it's not what you think. We've heard similar stories of helicopters causing tragedies like the Vic Morrow incident from Volume 2, but this specific helicopter crash didn't take place because of some wild stunt gone wrong. It actually happened as film director Boris Sagal was being transported from a film site to a nearby lodge that the crew had been staying at. And what happened, based on every report of this incident, simply states that Sagal walked into the tail blade of a running helicopter. This begs the question as to how that could happen, as I would expect anyone coming out of a operating helicopter that is turned on and the blades are moving, for them to walk out and see the blades and not move towards them and move away. And I racked my brain over this one for quite a while, especially considering the fact that even witnesses were unable to explain why exactly this happened. I think I figured out a possible explanation though. To preface this, there is not many details on the accident. For example, we don't know the helicopter type, we don't know which side Sagal got out on, and we don't know if there was anyone else being transported with him. All we know is he walked out of the helicopter, walked straight into the tail blade of it, and some witnesses were there on the scene. So what I think happened is something that maybe some of you out there may have experienced. Walking into a random pole, whether it be at school or on a sidewalk. So every time this has ever happened, you just feel like an absolute buffoon because, you know, why are you going to walk into something that is very clearly avoidable? But usually this only happens because someone or something gets your attention as you are walking away. So you instinctively turn around and forget that the pole is there. So when you turn back around, it causes you to run straight into it. Now imagine for a second that you are a film director and you just finished a full day of shooting. You're tired, you just landed from a noisy helicopter, and all you want to do is get into bed. So you get out of the helicopter as fast as you can, and right as you are walking away, someone calls to you from the helicopter or from some location nearby to let you know something. You know, maybe it's a simple goodbye or a question about the next day of filming, or, you know, an innocent joke about something that happened on set. And before you know it, you turn right back around and you walk straight into this helicopter blade. Of course, this is just my speculation based on the very little facts that we have, but I just can't seem to think of any other way this could have happened. I mean, you would hear the noise of the helicopter, you would feel the wind at the very least of this blade in front of you. Maybe someone else can offer a better explanation, because I know I'd love to hear it. The set of the James Bond film For Your Eyes Only was a pretty quiet one. Unlike the other accidents that I've talked about in the original series and in this video, this one had nothing to do with the production team at all. The culprit in this scenario was the poor design of the bobsled track. Now, your immediate opinion or thought might be to blame whoever the set designer was for this mishap. But there was no set designer. This was an actual location that was being used on set. This was a real bobsled track that was used in competition. Actual bobsled competitor was killed during the same exact turn that caused the stuntmen to pass. So very clearly it is on whoever designed the bobsled track to begin with, which was definitely not anyone on the production team, as they just hired this location for the film. But just unfortunate to see two people go out this way just because of a clear oversight on the creation of this track. This story surrounds the main star of Rawhide, Eric Fleming. But this story takes us way past his years on Rawhide into the unreleased episode of Off to See the Wizard, titled High Jungle. It's unclear what exactly this episode was supposed to be about, but at some point during shooting, the team and Eric Fleming were shooting in Peru on the Huallaga River. The scene that they were filming here involved Eric Fleming and his co-star Nico Minardo being in a canoe together. Now, when they were filming the scene, the canoe had suddenly filled with water and overturned. Luckily, Minardo was able to successfully swim back to shore, while everyone else's attention diverted to Fleming, who was now struggling and being swept away by the current of the river. Unfortunately, they were never able to recover his body. And what's truly scary about the situation is that Fleming was described to be an excellent swimmer and a scuba diver. And that makes this just so much scarier, because even if you have all of the qualifications to get yourself out of such a sticky situation, even then, you really don't know what could happen. In the months following, it was decided by the studio to cancel this particular episode, seeing as the tragedy took precedence over finishing it up. During the filming of The Squeeze, originally produced under the name Skip Tracer, a stuntman by the name of Victor Magnotta found himself trapped underwater in a car when a stunt went horribly wrong. The stunt in question involved Magnotta driving off a pier in Hoboken, New Jersey, straight into the Hudson River. Before he took off, Victor Magnotta was strapped inside using a 5-point harness. This harness was put in for safety reasons in the event that the car malfunctioned and he crashed elsewhere. He was to take off at the pier at a ramp and land the car flat on the water, almost like a belly flop. And that last detail is very important, because the reason they needed the car to land like a belly flop was to prevent any issues such as the glass breaking from taking a nosedive straight into the water. Now, the escape plan for this stunt was for the crew to dive into the water and ensure that he got out of his harness safely. In the event that his crew was taking a little bit longer to get to him and unhook everything, he also had a canister of air and a regulator hose. It's also reported that just before the stunts occurred, numerous safety checks were run, but one thing was changed that caused this entire stunt to go sideways. The glass windshield on the front of the car was, for no apparent reason, changed from normal glass to a sheet of plexiglass that was screwed down. The screws were reportedly torqued just a bit too much and stripped some of the holes for the plexiglass. Another clear oversight was how empty the car was at the time of filming. The car was so light that it led to the weight of the car shifting more towards the front. The entire vehicle had been stripped of any excess weight, and the only really big thing that was weighing the car down aside from the frame was the engine, which was located in the front of the vehicle. So going into the stunt, those two issues came up. When Victor Magnotta took off towards the pier and drove off the ramp, the car tipped forwards because of the weight displacement. The engine caused the car to be weighed down so much in front that instead of landing flat like they intended, he landed with the grill hitting the water first. And because of the plexiglass not being screwed down properly, the initial burst of water pushed the plexiglass into the car, effectively trapping Magnotta from moving at all, not even being able to grab his air canister and regulator. It took the scuba diving crew 20 minutes to get him out of the car, and by that time, Magnotta had already passed away. Magnotta appeared to be a pretty big stuntman in the scene, as he was the president of the stunt specialists, with some of the articles describing him as one of the top guys in the industry. It's just truly shocking how a few oversights can lead to someone as experienced as Victor Magnotta to endure such a truly terrible accident. The tragedy that happened on set of Warrens of Virginia is a bit of a mystery. After a long day of shooting, the main female lead, Martha Mansfield, is reported to have gone out for a break by relaxing in her car. And after 10 or so minutes have passed, witnesses on set describe seeing Martha with her dress set on fire, running out of her car looking for help. It was at that moment that another actor on set, Wilfrid Littell, threw his heavy overcoat on her in order to stop the fire from happening. However, at that point, the burns were so substantial to overcome, and Martha did succumb to her injuries later in the hospital. The mystery of this story is who caused the fire, because we know exactly what caused the fire, which was a match that was used to seemingly light a cigarette on set. And the dress that Martha was wearing was one of those big poofy old dresses used for the movie. The first theory that people point to is the possibility that Martha went out for a smoke and upon lighting her cigarette, accidentally dropped the match and lit her dress ablaze. This seemed plausible enough for me to accept had it not been for an anecdote from Martha's mom. She explains that Martha had never smoked in her life, going on to explain, "Martha often told me that smoking made her very uncomfortable and that she really didn't care for it. In fact, she seldom used cigarettes except when they were called for in a picture, and even then, they made her feel ill. I can never believe that she lighted a cigarette if she was, as they tell me, sitting quite alone in her car. If it was a match or a cigarette that set my poor darling's dress on fire, it was not of her own lighting. Of that, I am positive." Of course, this could just be flat out wrong, as we don't have any proof, but the other theory also has no tangible evidence aside from the match. If it wasn't Martha who tossed the match aside, then it had to be someone else on set. But no one else has bothered to come forward, and no one has been found guilty of doing so. And this type of tragedy is just very rare, and it's one that I've never seen talked about, at least not to my knowledge. But let me know what you think possibly happened to Martha Mansfield on the set of Warrens of Virginia. During the filming of Siege of Sidney Street, released in 1960, there was an accident very similar to the Pepsi commercial with Michael Jackson. Only in this situation, it wasn't entirely an accident when Leonard Sachs was set on fire. The scene called for the entire set they were on to be set ablaze. Obviously, they aren't just going to light fire to a room that they are filming on just for a shot. So they set up the room with inflammable jelly so that they can keep reshooting as much as they wanted to. This meant that everything that would be set on fire, the chairs, the tables, floors, or any piece of furniture that was caught on camera that needed to be caught on fire was coated in this inflammable jelly, including our star actor for the scene, Leonard Sachs. The only issue is that they forgot to fireproof his hair. And I say forgot in air quotations because it seems as though they purposely left his hair out of the process. We know this because of another actor that we've already talked about that happened to be starring in the same film, Donald Sinden. In his book we've already mentioned already, A Touch of Memoirs, we can see on page 294 that he asked a colleague of his, have they fireproofed his hair? To which they responded, no, I don't think they have. Sinden fired back, but don't you think they should? And the colleague brushed it off saying, no, it would take 20 minutes. And what's wild is the next paragraph gives us a glimpse into how dark the world can be at times, especially in the filmmaking business. Sinden writes, "I was informed later that the explanation for this was that had Leonard suffered any damage, the insurance company would have paid up. But 20 minutes of the crew's time on an hourly rate merely to fireproof an actor's hair would have had to have been paid for by the film company." They decided to forego fireproofing this actor's hair just to save money. And not just any money, but 20 minutes worth of money, which is insane when you think about it. When you think about how badly injured Leonard Sachs could have been. Luckily, Sachs lived through this with merely just singeing his hair, but it's just completely irresponsible. On the surface, this story might stick out like a sore thumb on this layer, but I put it all the way down here, not just because of how obscure it was, but just how truly disturbing it is to hear that companies are willing to purposely put anyone at risk if it means they get to keep a few more dollars in their pocket. Flower on the Stone is a bit of a step back from the Hollywood accidents, as this story takes us all the way to the 1960s in the USSR. It's here that actress Inna Berdichenko was filming her follow-up film to her initial breakout performance in 1959's Ivana. The title of this new film that she was starring in, when translated to English, is A Flower on a Stone. Her life would take a tragic turn when director Anatoly Slesarenko wanted her to film a scene in which she was to run back into a burning house. They ran the take reportedly 2 times, and on the 3rd take, Inna's heel got stuck in a crack on the floor, which normally wouldn't have been an issue. Or they could have sent in crew to go in and get her out of it, and they would simply reshoot what was going on. But it was at that moment that her shoe got stuck that suddenly the building they were filming in collapsed. Her clothes caught on fire, and the only thing she could do was cover her face and hope for the best. After being saved by an extra named Sergei Ivanov, she was immediately brought to the hospital. Nearly 78% of her body was burned, and because this was the 1960s, it was damn near impossible to save her given the medicine that they had at the time. Worst part of this story was Inna being 3 months pregnant. And just like that, because of a director not taking all the necessary safety precautions like he should have, a life was lost. And if that makes you feel enraged, it should. There's so many other stories just like this that have gone unreported or failed to capture the attention with no real justice besides a slap on the wrist. And it's just absolutely disgusting what these executives have been able to get away with. During the filming of The Trail of 98, 3 men passed away when a river stunt involving a boat didn't go as planned. I believe the scene they are attempting to shoot involved the stuntmen packed into small boats that were to ride along the water rapids. Some of this still exists in the film today, but what you are seeing is not the exact scene in question. There were 2 boats to be shot riding along the frigid waters, with one boat carrying actor Ray Thompson and J. Gordon Carveth, with the other boat carrying one actor, F.H. Daughters. Both boats capsized around the same exact time, causing each person to swim against the water. And as you probably gathered from the footage, this was impossible. Seeing the men struggle, another man on set named Joseph Boutin took it upon himself to dive into the water in an attempt to help rescue at least one of the 3 men that were now being swept away by the current of the raging rapids. Only one of them made it out, which was luckily J. Gordon Carveth, who managed to swim back to shore despite it seeming very impossible. However, the other 3 in this story suffered the same fate and passed away after being swept away by the rapids. The more I read about these accidents, the more my fear of the ocean is just being reaffirmed, because so many of these stories are about people being swept away by currents. The ocean and water is no joke, and it's sad to see film sets treat it like it is. Even in cases like The Abyss, where they have highly trained people on set, you never know what could happen, and as such, there shouldn't be spots like this where actors are put into these life-threatening situations just for film. I initially chose this story because of the death of stuntman Jack Budlong, but upon further research, it appears that not just one person's life was taken during the filming of this film. 3 people were fatally injured during the film's climactic battle sequence of They Died with Their Boots On. Director Raoul Walsh insisted on this scene being the pinnacle of anything he had done prior, initially wanting it to be visually striking by fitting in as many people as he physically could into the scene. The sequence was quite ambitious for the time, requiring, well, just hundreds of people all on horses riding at the same time, which was as chaotic as it looks to film. It's this chaos that caused 3 individuals to suffer life-ending injuries: George Murphy, Jack Budlong, and 1 unnamed extra. The story of the unnamed extra is omitted from some sites, so I'm speculating that this one happened and has been spread through simple word of mouth from people that were on set, but the places that do mention it report that this person seemingly died of a heart attack while riding atop a horse in the scene. This was not the case with the other 2 people that were on set, which was George Murphy and Jack Budlong. Both suffered fatal injuries after falling from their horse. It's claimed that George Murphy was an untrained rider that was used during the scene, and that his fall was caused because he was drunk while on set. Some of the sources state that Murphy was told to get off his horse but refused outright, leading him to fall off of his horse and break his neck on the way down. And it appears that these 2 casualties, with George Murphy and the unnamed extra, didn't really bother Walsh much at all, because they were, at least on paper, actual accidents. I still don't think that George Murphy should have been on a horse to begin with, because he was already known to not have experience riding one. But Walsh may have felt that because he was drunk, it wasn't really anyone's fault but his own, even though it 1000% is. And the unnamed extra died of natural causes, so it seems as though Walsh had, visibly no issue with either of these accidents. But that all changed with the fate that Jack Budlong met during his time in this scene. The experienced horseman was issued a prop sword like everyone else, but either due to his own arrogance or just wanting to feel cool on set, he insisted heavily on using a real sword. And it's this decision that would cost him his life. Although I will say it wasn't the entire cause of what happened. The horses that were used on set were not trained for this specific scene. There were a lot of prop explosions going off left and right, and while this made for a great look on the film, it caused a lot of the horses that were on set to panic. And when horses panic, especially with untrained riders on them, and even experienced ones like Jack Budlong, it's just an accident waiting to happen. Jack Budlong didn't know this when they called action, so he began frantically waving his sword around for the scene when a nearby explosion caused his horse to panic, throwing him off into the ground. Despite him making an effort to throw the very real sword to his side, when he finally hit the ground, he had landed directly on his sword, running all the way to the other side of his back. The injuries were obviously far too much to handle, and he passed away a few days later in the hospital. After this incident, Walsh fought to not use any more falling horses during the battle sequences, and was even forced to pay the stuntmen far more than before. And it's these kinds of stories that I wanted to bring to light, because who knows about this stuff? I didn't even know about this film, let alone the accidents that happened on set. And I found this story to be truly compelling because I can see why someone would think initially it's the extra's fault for showing up drunk, or it's Jack Budlong's fault for using a real sword. But like I've said so many times in the other parts to this series, there should never be a situation where a person working on the set of these films are put into these dangerous predicaments. There should be some regulations in place to force out somebody from the set that is intoxicated and not be dumb enough to let someone use a real sword. Sure, the extras technically put themselves in harm's way, but why didn't anyone stop them when they clearly knew that that was an issue? And that's the question I always come back to in each of these stories, especially during the next few that are on this video. I really hate to say this, but if you are an animal lover, then I might suggest skipping this one, because this, if it's true, might be the worst set ever that used live animals for film. If I just described you, then I will allow you like a few seconds to leave, because just get to the next one. It's timestamped all down below. With all that said though, we're gonna get on with this story. Thanks to an archived page on humanehollywood.org, it's public information on the alleged atrocities that took place on the set of Heaven's Gate from 1980. I say alleged because every source I come to on this story, whether it be an old article that was made during the time the film was released, or a recent top 10 accidents article that happens to mention this incident, it never gives a credible source. They all only ever point to that one Humane Association article where there's these allegations onto the production, but it never explains who they got this information from, or that they received information from really anybody. They just have the article out there for everybody to read. Whether or not this actually happened, what are the allegations that were posed against this film's production? In order, there is alleged to be an actual cockfight that included blades being inserted into the talons of chickens, blood from a steer being used on actors and extras during the film, several horses being tripped on purpose and severely injured in the process, with 5 total horses presuming to have died on set, and worst of all, blowing up a horse. Or at least that's what's expressed on most sites that talk about this. If this is all true, then it's just plain disgusting. And we do have reports that kind of back this up. If we take a look at the AFI catalog, we can see that they timelined the events during the filming of Heaven's Gate. On October 8th, 1980, a woman by the name of Mary Irene Hodges filed a lawsuit against director Michael Cimino on the grounds that her horse underwent severe physical and behavioral trauma and disfigurement. So there is some other proof that these atrocities took place on the set. And the filmmakers have gone on record at every step of the way denying every single allegation, but here and there have slipped in information that may have led to this story being in fact true. For example, they did admit that they tripped horses on set, but they claimed that the horses were trained for tripping, which really makes no sense because I'm not sure if it was during the 1980s or if it was a little bit later, but there were sets designed to make horses trip in a safe manner, but I'm pretty sure they weren't a thing during this time. So again, these are just allegations. There's been no actual lawsuit that is have everything public and well documented. Right now it's still up in the air, but I would imagine with the timeline of events being the way that it is, there had to have been some kind of conflict on set that led to these allegations. Even if it's not that severe, we know that live animals were not treated well on the set of Heaven's Gate from 1980. This next story is about Dale Van Sickle, a seasoned stuntman and one of the founding members of the Stuntmen's Association of Motion Pictures. He had a pretty successful life from the looks of it, being a vital part of the Florida Gators during his college years, shifting into Hollywood where he got his start as a stuntman in 1933's Duck Soup. He'd go on to appear in hundreds of films, even stunt doubling multiple times for George Reeves as Superman in The Adventures of Superman. So to say this guy knew what he was doing is a bit of an understatement. During the filming of Disney's 1978 project, No Deposit, No Return, they wanted Dale Van Sickle to perform a stunt where he had to drive a car off of a wharf. This seemed easy enough when you consider just how experienced Van Sickle was, although there was one major oversight when it came to the oil being applied to the car to make the stunt happen. And for those confused like me at first, I believe that the oil was applied to the car to ensure a smooth takeoff at the end of the wharf. Well, it turns out that they used way too much, so when they went to initially film the stunt, the car was a bit too hard to control and caused Dale Van Sickle to crash, slamming his head into the dashboard and leaving him with severe brain damage. Sickle experienced massive health decline, and just a few years after the incident, he did pass away. In this obituary from the Montgomery Advertiser, it mentions that a lawsuit was pending at the time of his death. However, it appears that it was settled outside of court with Walt Disney Studios. And it's here that I want to mention that this sort of thing happens a lot. Throughout my time searching up all these accidents, I've seen it time and time again that these studios settle everything outside of court. This way, there's no public documentation on what really happened, and they will most likely pressure the individual to settle for much, much less than if they went to court. Because honestly, suing a billion-dollar corporation does not sound like a good time. And Disney knows that. So they know that they can pressure these people into settling outside of court, because who the hell is going to try and go up 1v1 against Disney? Wallace Reed's life in 1917 seemed to be going pretty well. He had a newborn son and was happily married to Dorothy Davenport, a veteran actress of the time. All was going well until he was contracted to be in 1919's Valley of the Giants. There wasn't any crazy stunt or accident in this story, but it's probably one of the darkest stories that I'll have ever covered when it comes to these Hollywood incidents. You see, what led to the death of Wallace Reed didn't happen until 3 years after the filming of The Valley of the Giants. But the origin of what caused his death did happen on the set of this film, or at least en route to one of the locations of this film. The origin of what caused Wallace Reed to ultimately pass away starts with a train ride to the filming location of one of the sets of The Valley of the Giants. It's reported that they were on this train, and as they were crossing a bridge near Arcata, California, the train transporting the cast and crew had derailed. This left Wallace Reed with a lot of injuries, which included a deep gash on his scalp and cuts on his arms that are said to have gone straight to the bone. Due to the severity of his injuries, he wouldn't be able to go on filming, so the studio stepped in and prescribed him a doctor who then gave him morphine to deal with the pain and be able to go on filming this movie. And before you jump to the comments questioning why this medication was prescribed, it was admittedly pretty normal during this time to use morphine for pain. What wasn't normal was how much they gave him. The studio is rumored to have given Wallace increasing levels of morphine to cope with the pain, and mostly so he could film the movie. Whether or not this part is true has yet to be proven, and I want that to be known right now. And judging by the sources I found, it seems that most that research this topic are split on this one detail, but it matters a whole lot when it comes to the story of Wallace Reed, because the aftermath of this incident was not pretty. Wallace quickly became dependent on the drug, becoming increasingly addicted to it after the film was wrapped up. For nearly 3 years after The Valley of the Giants, he suffered back and forth with this addiction, with it taking a heavy toll on his family life, and it wasn't too long before he eventually succumbed to the addiction in 1923. This left quite the impact on his wife, as she would go on to dedicate the next role that she was in to her husband. Dorothy tried to educate the world on the dangers of drug addiction, starring in 1923's Human Wreckage, which is a film that discusses the topic of narcotics and heavily dives deep into the negativities and everything wrong with getting involved with drugs. And for most of her life after this, she always went by Mrs. Wallace Reed, whether it be in a movie or in a conversation thereafter. So you see, if it is true that the studio played a vital role in contributing to Wallace Reed's addiction, then this would mean that this would be just one of the most just disturbing film accidents that I've ever read about. However, considering the fact that this is one of the first cases where a star died from addiction, and just how old the movie is in general, we really may never know what happened on the set of The Valley of the Giants. Sorry to interrupt your smooth watch time. Just wanted to kind of bump in for a second and explain why there's such a drastic change between the sections before this and the sections after this, because you're going to notice a lot more of a serious tone when it comes to the next few parts. Most of it was just because I wanted to change up my style for a little bit. Kind of, you see like the set that I have here now. This isn't what I used to have. I used to kind of just point the camera at me and record videos like that, but I've been trying really hard to switch over to, I would say, my own style, you know, and I like the little thing I have going on here. I'm going to start putting more stuff up, probably better stuff up there. I have this little light now. I guess as I go more thrifting and antique shopping, I'll find more stuff to make this area look a little more lively. It's already a lot better than from like the SpongeBob video, which was like the first one that I really tried doing this at. But yeah, it is nothing more than just me trying out new things. I did go for a lot more of a serious tone, and you'll definitely feel that in the videos. But yeah, it's a little bit jarring going from me talking to you casually to like, and then like it's, you know, it's super serious. So I just wanted to give that really quick before the next part of the video plays. But if you're actually watching this and you're taking it in and like you're not asleep or something, thank you. Thanks. It's incredible. I can't believe that people are like, some people will actually just sit here and watch this entire thing and listen to me yap for like 5 hours. Yeah. I will stop talking and I will let the serious Ray get to his part of the video. Released in 1984, this film shocked the world with its depiction of a real-life story adapted to film.
Some young man, usually of Southeast Asian origin, had been reported to have died in the middle of a nightmare. And the first two I clipped and kept without thinking too much about it, and then the third one had really the nub of a story in it.
A nub of a story there truly was, seeing as the original Nightmare on Elm Street received critical acclaim upon its release, becoming the sole reason for people to be afraid of falling asleep, never choosing to hold back on any of the blood and guts. But it was this decision that almost led to one of the most disastrous mishaps on the set of any film. This mishap took place during the scene where Glenn is swooped away by Freddy and presumably murdered. The part of this scene that we're talking about today happens a few seconds after Glenn is pulled into the bed. There is this wondrous shot where blood shoots out like a fountain, getting all over the room and leaving an absolute mess. This practical effect took a lot of manpower to create. I mean, judging by the shot, you can probably imagine just how much work went into this, because everything you are seeing is really happening on screen. According to Wes Craven and some crew members, this shot was done using a rotating room. For those who care, the room was initially created for another death in the movie. That is the first on-screen death with Tina, the one where she is dragged around the ceiling. They reused that same room for this shot, only this time they kept the room flipped upside down with Wes Craven strapped to a camera chair filming the entire spectacle. I imagine it looked something like this, with Wes Craven strapped to a chair in the room with a hole through the bed that allowed the crew to pour in the fake blood from the top so it could flow through for the shot. All was going according to plan except when they called action. A few oversights led to an incredible disaster. As the blood pulled out, it immediately hit the light on top, which apparently electrocuted the person pouring in the blood. The blood was also so heavy and there was so much of it that it caused the room to become off balance. Suddenly, cables and rigging that held the room together started to chaotically rip out, causing the room to begin rolling towards the cast and crew. People began leaping out of the way, blood splattering everywhere and on everyone, thanks to a window that was open in the rolling room. Wes Craven explained that from his perspective, the blood came in, a bunch of huge flashes and sparks went about, and then just total darkness, staying nearly suspended in the dark for 20 minutes covered in this fake blood. Again, this is just the beginning of today's video, as no one was actually hurt during this horrific incident, but at the same time, that cannot be said for those further down on the list. If you haven't seen Maximum Overdrive, I'll catch you up to speed. This movie is well regarded for being one of the best, worst movies you can watch. The kind of thing you only put on to laugh at how truly bad it was. But behind all those laughs and belly aches lies one of the most obscure on-set film accidents that changed the life of one member of the cast and crew. Armando Iannucci was hired onto the team of Stephen King's Maximum Overdrive as the director of photography. It was his job to bring his over 30 years of filming experience to aid in the production of this film. Only one problem: Iannucci didn't speak English very well. All the while, it was Stephen King's first time ever directing. And seeing as Stephen King was coming onto set coked out of his mind every day, it's clear to see how this accident might have happened. Maximum Overdrive, in a nutshell, is about machines coming to life that murder people. One of those machines was a killer lawnmower. And while that seems a bit silly to say out loud, I gotta give him credit. That is a killer lawnmower. The scene that was to use this lawnmower involved it coming at the screen, meaning the camera would be placed in front of it to catch this specific shot. Nothing too crazy, but it was made crazy by the king himself, who ignored people's pleas to take the blades off the lawnmower because he wanted it to look authentic and scary. And scary it was. When the scene was shot, the lawnmower took off a bit faster than expected and came into contact with a piece of wood that was used to prop up the camera filming it. Thanks to the blade still being on it, chunks of wooden pieces were shot out, with a few splinters flying directly into Armando Iannucci's eye. It's reported that Iannucci never recovered and was left without one eye for the remainder of his life. And this gets far worse when you realize exactly what his job was: a cinematographer. Thankfully, this story has a bit of a resolution to it, as Armando Iannucci filed a lawsuit for nearly $18 million, deciding in 1992 to settle this dispute outside of court for $975,000, which in my opinion is a pretty low price to pay for losing your eye in such a manner. The ocean. Quite possibly one of the most terrifying places to visit, considering the fact that we know literally nothing about it. This is why it was incredibly exciting and scary that the director for 1931's The Viking was dead set on filming out in the icy waters of Canada. We've touched on this before in my earlier videos on film accidents, but this was the 1930s, well before any kind of regulations were made for the safety of cast and crew on any film set. Prior to its eventual release of The Viking, the director Verrick Frissell organized a private screening of the film. While the initial cut seemed to please Frissell and the friends that watched it with him, he felt that the movie was lacking in shots of the beautiful icy wastelands that him and his crew had seen while filming. And so Frissell, along with his crew, boarded the SS Viking, a ship that was made famous by the movie, and even more so by the events preceding this voyage. They embarked on their trip in early March of 1931 with the goal of obtaining more shots. And obtain more shots they did, capturing more of the icy scenery along with some apparently gruesome footage of real seal hunting. Their trip appeared to be coming to an end on March 13th, when their ship had gotten trapped between ice off the coast of Newfoundland. Frissell and his crew were trapped for nearly 2 days, and it was in those 2 days that they tried pretty much everything to free the ship, but their efforts were pointless, as any attempt to break the extremely thick ice was unsuccessful, leaving the crew to grow more and more hopeless as time ticked on. That is, until one of the crew remembered they had crates full of dynamite stored in the ship's powder room. Believing that they might be able to break the ice using this new explosive, the crew prepared the charges in the hopes of gaining their freedom. And this is where the story takes a horrific turn for the worst. While in the middle of preparing the dynamite, one of the crew accidentally ignited one while they were still inside of the powder room. This resulted in nearly all the 25 crates of dynamite to explode one after another, tearing apart not only the ship, but upwards of 27 men in the process. Reports from after the incident occurred express how no one's bodies, including the director, were ever found, believing that if the explosion didn't get them, then the freezing water below sure did. The Viking would eventually release months later and was met with less than stellar reviews, but what people were raving about was marveling at the extraordinary shots that the crew managed to get before their journey came to an abrupt end. This is Gregg Allman, an American musician best known for being one of the founding members of the Allman Brothers Band. He didn't reach this amount of success without an interesting life story, and like many celebrities do at some point, he put out an autobiography in 2012 titled My Cross to Bear. Allman didn't know it at the time, but by putting out that autobiography, he had just set someone's life on an unforgettable path. For the most part, the autobiography was well received and popular among fans of Allman, providing an intimate look at his entire musical career with many of life's personal challenges coming and going. The autobiography was such a hit that a movie titled Midnight Rider: The Gregg Allman Story was put into development around 2013. American film director Randall Miller and film producer Jody Savin announced a partnership with Open Road Films to bring a biopic to life based on Gregg Allman's My Cross to Bear. Prior to Midnight Rider, Randall Miller had previously directed a few film and television projects, but nothing could have prepared him for the disaster to lie ahead as the production for Midnight Rider began. One year after the initial announcement, Midnight Rider had a date set for its first day of filming, February 20th, 2014. The film crew is transported to a property that happens to have a CSX-owned railroad running straight through it. CSX, for those that are wondering, just happens to be a well-known freight train transportation company. And what this really means in the bigger span of things is that it was highly unlikely that they would shut down their trains just for this small film. Prior to being on set, the production team asked CSX for permission to shoot on their train tracks, to which the company had denied their requests twice. CSX has come out and outright explained this to media outlets, especially after what ended up happening. Despite the crew's denial of permission, Miller still made everyone get ready to shoot on sets of the train tracks. The shot involved the actor portraying Allman to be on a heavy hospital bed that was sat in the middle of the train tracks. But not just on any part of the tracks. Miller insisted on the shot being on top of what's known as a trestle. If you've ever seen those cool looking triangle structures, whether it be in movies or in real life, that is what a trestle is. This is important because it means that the only method of escape should a train come is to run to either end of the trestle. as jumping to the side would most certainly result in a long fall to your death. And if you're questioning, why were they even filming such a random assortment of things? Like, there's a man on a medical bed on top of train tracks. Like, what is actually going on here? Well, apparently this was part of a dream sequence involving the main character, which explains this little obscurity of the situation. What's been left unexplained, though, is Miller's carelessness when it came to filming this sequence, because not only was he denied permission to film here, but he convinced everyone that it was okay to film directly on the trestle. And so the film was underway. The crew made their way deep into the train tracks, the camera was being set up to film, the leading man was in position. All that was left was to press record. Just then, a train came around the corner at nearly 60 miles per hour, leaving cast and crew with less than a minute to react and escape the barreling train coming their way. The footage you watched earlier is the real footage from the set. This is not a reenactment. This is what went down on that tragic day all those years ago. Of course, given their little amount of time to react, and given the fact that they only had one escape route, several people were injured, and one person was unable to get out at all. Camera assistant Sarah Jones was struck and killed instantly, while the other crew members suffered fractured bones and cuts from shrapnel sent toward them. The truly disgusting part of this production was evidence of the fact that they tried to immediately start the movie up again. As Philip Schuer wrote in his article from March 3rd, 2014, following the collision, producers requested a permit through the Savannah Film Office to film at a private home in the city next week. So basically, these producers caused the death of one crew member, and their first priority during the situation was to try and find a new location to film. Wild. What followed was a series of lawsuits and court cases against Randall Miller, his wife Jody Savin, and Jay Sedgren. And it's here that we really got to know these people, with Miller and Savin openly stating right after their detainment, in the weeks and months that follow, when the true facts of the events are revealed, people will know that this was not a crime. We never had criminal intent. We would never knowingly or intentionally put anybody's safety at risk. This was a horrible tragedy and a horrific accident. We will dedicate ourselves in the future to honoring Sarah's memory by promoting the safest work environment for everybody in the film industry. Humbly, Randy Miller and Jody Savin. And this story does not have a good ending, at least not in my opinion. Jody Savin got off scot-free for the most part. Jay Sedgwick received 10 years of probation with a mere $10,000 fine, and Randall Miller only served a year of his initial 2-year sentence, getting off early with 8 years of probation, with the only upside being that he was banned from film production in any capacity. But that ban will only last 10 years, and seeing as we are nearing the 9th year, it's depressing to hear that these people's continued ignorance and negligence has for the most part gone unpunished. I have to say, this story reminded me a lot of the Vic Morrow incident in that I feel justice was not served. These are the kinds of stories that Hollywood loves for us to forget about, and it's the main reason why I chose to even begin this little series in the first place. Mountain climbing is one of the most dangerous activities that one can partake in. There is so much that can go wrong in such a short amount of time. Now throw in cameras, an entire crew set, and a deadline for production into the mix, and you'll get the situation that we had during the filming of the Eiger Sanction, a film released in 1975 that was directed by none other than Clint Eastwood. He also starred in the film as Dr. Jonathan Hemlock, a college art professor and part-time assassin hired to track down a man that happens to be climbing the Eiger Mountain in Switzerland. Seeing as the plot heavily involved the Eiger Mountain, there was a lot of preparation required before any type of filming took place. In fact, Clint Eastwood overall did a pretty good job as director to ensure the safety of his crew, even going as far as having lightweight cameras developed just for this movie. He also took the help of 2 other people that were eventually hired on to aid in the production, specifically when it came to the Eiger Mountain scenes. Those 2 hires were known as David Knowles and Mike Hoover. Clint Eastwood had Mike Hoover take him through a ton of mountain climbing practice before even thinking of filming on location, with Knowles acting as a climbing stunt and also aiding in the photography of the entire production. As Mike Hoover has gone on to explain since the incident, it was a beautiful morning the day that it happened. They took a chopper up to the west ridge of the Eiger and were tasked with finishing some very difficult setups. A little after 3 o'clock, they had finished what they had to do with the face of the mountain and began climbing back up to the top to finish filming on a flat area of the Eiger. But then Hoover recalled that he needed a specific POV shot of rocks falling. They were to shoot some fake rocks falling off the side of the mountain, and as he was making his descent back down, David Knowles offered to help, and so the 2 went into position. Overall, it was a pretty simple shot. The foam rocks would be dropped towards the camera, and David Knowles, who was handling the camera, would simply swipe any away, acting from the character's point of view. Literally nothing went wrong. They got the shot and everything was pretty normal. Mike Hoover told David Knowles to go back up and that he'd finish cleaning, but Knowles insisted on staying and helping pick up the mess that they made. And for the most part, they were kind of just shooting the shit, as 2 people do in any workplace, telling each other stories back and forth about themselves and just getting to know each other. Hoover said it was when the 2 began laughing that tragedy struck. A boulder had come loose from above and flew directly at the pair. Hoover explained that this is what happened from his perspective. He was laughing, then he heard a noise, and then he instantly took cover by tucking as close to the wall as possible. The rock then smashed into a bit of his back, and suddenly he found himself pinned to the ground. When he looked up, he was met with a horrifying sight. His crewmate David Knowles, lifeless on top of him. Hoover suffered from a cracked pelvis, which put him out of commission for at least a week, and director Clint Eastwood surprisingly did the right thing in the events following this, wanting to stop production entirely because of what had just happened. The other members of the climbing crew kept insisting that Eastwood finish the production, stating that they all as climbers know the risks of being there and doing what they do. Clint Eastwood eventually came around, believing that if he were to call off the production, it would mean Knowles died for no reason. As far as stories go, this one was a lot different than the others that we've gone over. Usually there is some type of malpractice involved, a safety precaution that wasn't followed, or just plain ignorance on one person's behalf. But there wasn't any of that in this story. Eastwood did all of the proper training leading up to being on set of the production. He had proper equipment made just for the project, and he hired the right guys for the job. Sometimes you can do everything right and still have tragedy strike. But there is one silver lining here. A Blogspot article exists that posted Hoover's full side of the Eiger Mountain incident. Hidden away on that blog, if you scroll all the way to the bottom, are some very lighthearted comments about David Knowles, with some of his neighbors even chiming in, talking about how keen of a climber he was and how great of a person he is, and others sharing wholesome stories about how they met him through mountain climbing. So despite the horrific accident that took place all those years ago, it's nice to know that David Knowles likely went out doing the very thing he loved the most. From the other stories that we've gone over in all my videos on film accidents, usually there is a lot of blame on the director causing someone else to perish. This is a unique case where the director of the movie was the cause of their own demise. Sort of. Now I might pronounce this name wrong, but I'm going to be pronouncing it like this for the rest of this segment. So, H.B. Halicki is the director for the first Gone in 60 Seconds, which was a film released in 1974. Made famous for its focus on automotive action sequences and stunt work, specifically infamous for its nearly 40-minute car chase scene where the production team destroyed 93 cars in order to make it happen. And I'm not kidding. I'll leave this in the description. It's literally 40 minutes of classic car chase action. Now, because of how well received the first movie was, it was a no-brainer to make a second one. But there was a lot of pressure to make it even bigger and better than the first. The director was even forced to purchase $8 million in insurance before making the sequel, because a local official didn't believe that Halicki took his safety seriously. And seeing as how this story would eventually turn out, I think that official may have had a point. The year was 1989, and Halicki was looking to keep up his promise of making a bigger and better film, purchasing well over 400 vehicles to be involved in some crazy action-packed sequence that contained the so-called ultimate stunt, a real falling water tower that was supposed to be the climax to the entire scene. And quite the scene it was. What remains of the sequence is on YouTube, and it was some truly crazy shit. Cars flying everywhere, vehicles climbing over top of other cars demolition style, all topped off with the movie's star vehicle, the Slicer, which did some gnarly damage to everything in sight. It was shaping up to be exactly what Halicki had envisioned. That was until it came time for the climactic water tower sequence. The support cables for the tower suddenly snapped, causing it to fall prematurely. As everyone else dove for safety, the tower knocked down a telephone pole that crushed Halicki before he had time to move out of the way. I'll admit, I was quick to dismiss this story as nothing more than just a freak accident. In fact, I wasn't even going to make a segment on it, until I read an article by a man named Michael McCann, who posed a pretty interesting point that I gotta be honest, I hadn't even really considered. Why was all of this allowed? I mean, this was literally insane to have all of these real life-size cars being destroyed, and then to have a real life-sized water tower fall to top the entire stunt off. It makes you wonder, why couldn't he just do the stunt on a smaller scale? That's literally what every other movie does. As McCann puts it, Halicki's death raises questions about the adequacy of safety procedures for the stunt, and even whether the stunt should have been attempted in the first place. The collapse of the water tower could have been done on a smaller scale model, according to stunt experts. And this is very true. I feel like the pressure from the public for Halicki to outdo his first movie may have pushed him into wanting every single thing to be authentic, when surely he could have just done everything on a miniature level and ensured the safety of everyone, including himself. And for those in pursuit of the authenticness of everything, wanting to see the real thing happen on screen, you gotta ask yourself, is it really worth risking people's lives in the process? I mean, in this case, it's said that all the safety checks were done and it was just chalked up to a freak accident. And it was an accident. I want to make it clear that I don't think anyone in this incident is to blame. I'm not blaming Halicki for wanting to outdo his original, because honestly, I think that's what everyone would do in that position. I just think this is an interesting case where we should kind of question, had there been more safety precautions in place to quality control these stunts and decide which ones we can or can't do, would this have even had a chance to happen? Peer pressure. It's one of the few things that basically everyone experiences at some point in their life. From being forced to take your first drink to acting a certain way in public because that's what you think is expected of you. It's a powerful thing that acts on us whether we want it to or not. And it's an important concept to note before we talk about the next two events, because although they were preventable on paper, I think both are cases where peer pressure or just the pressure from other aspects of life caused them to happen. Let's talk about the first one. This is Incident in a Ghostland, a lesser-known horror film written and directed. So the two sisters in the movie have older and younger versions of themselves. The actress that plays the younger version of Vera is the person in question. Taylor Hickson was the actress that played this role, and she did a damn good job. So much in fact that her commitment to the role caused herself permanent disfigurement. During a scene where her character is supposed to pound on a pane of glass, Taylor Hickson was instructed to give it her all. And with each subsequent take, the director kept pressing for her to hit the glass harder and harder. This made Hickson question the director on whether or not it was safe to do so. The director assured her that there would be nothing to worry about. And so, Taylor Hickson carried on pounding on the glass as hard as she possibly could. As expected, the glass eventually gave, shattering and causing severe cuts to Hickson's face and upper body, and the injuries were pretty serious. I feel like it's so easy to read these stories and be unimpressed by a simple cut, but I'm going to show you a picture of Taylor right after the incident. I'll obviously give you a few moments to skip past this if you really want to, because I do think it's a bit more on the gruesome side. If you don't do well with the sight of blood or anything of the sort, this is your chance to skip past. I'm only showing this because I really believe it's important to understand the severity of the injury so we as a whole can empathize with Taylor in regards to the story. So, here is a picture taken shortly after the glass incident, requiring nearly 70 stitches as well as laser and silicone treatment. And all of this is coming directly from the court documents. Points 12, 13, and 14 exhibit exactly what I just went over. The lawsuit also goes over how it was totally within reason to expect the crew to ensure that safety glass was used, because in the event that safety glass somehow broke, it would not result in sharp shards that could cause damage like this. Obviously, neither of these safety precautions were taken in Taylor's case. And to me, this was akin to peer pressure, or at the very least, some kind of pressure, right? Like having tons of cameras on you, a crew of people waiting for you to perform in a scene, and a director pressuring you into doing something that you're just unsure of. These are all qualities that a lot of actors find themselves in every single time they go to film. And some of them are not so lucky to end up alive after what they are forced to do. The last film in a series adaptation of Alexander Dumas' novels, also known as being the last film that Roy Kinnear would appear in. This story is very reminiscent of what you are used to from the series. Roy Kinnear, who played Planchet in The Return of the Musketeers, was asked to shoot a scene that involved a horse and a wooden bridge. Kinnear was confused upon learning that they wanted him to do this very dangerous stunt. It's been made clear since that tragic day that he expressed concern over the stunt and spoke with various stuntmen on set about his fear over doing what the director wanted. And it's here that I have to make it clear that he was never offered a stunt double, which made absolutely no sense because Kinnear made it well known that he had no experience horseback riding. So to not just ask any actor, but an actor who has no experience doing a dangerous stunt, to then go and force them to do a dangerous stunt is just plain stupid. It's literally asking for an accident to happen. This didn't matter to Richard Lester, the director that pressured Roy to do the stunt, despite all the obstacles in their way. Roy's son Rory later gave an explanation as to what happened in an article on The Guardian, explaining that his dad wrote a letter to his mom just before he set off, saying, "Just about to do a stunt that even the stuntmen have said is too dangerous." Citing himself, they all knew, and yet the shot was still prioritized over the safety of actors. And this is where we have to touch on why these accidents mostly happen. Of course, some of them are true accidents, such as the Eiger Mountain incident, but a lot of them can be chalked up to directors needing to get that thrilling shot that is almost always at the expense of someone's well-being. And despite all of the pushback, Roy Kinnear was ordered to do the scene. So it began, and like predicted, he fell off his horse, causing massive pelvic injuries and internal bleeding. And unfortunately for Roy Kinnear, he would succumb to his injuries later on in the hospital. His family obviously sued the director, Richard Lester, on the grounds of exposing an actor to unnecessary risks while filming, with their main piece of evidence being the fact that Roy was never offered a stunt double. The Kinnear family rightfully won the case, settling for nearly £650,000, and leaving Richard Lester with the forced choice to quit making films because of the accident. Since then, Rory Kinnear, the son of Roy Kinnear, has been part of the filmmaking industry himself, and has even spoke out against the Musketeers production years later when another accident cost the life of Mark Milsom, a cameraman whose life was taken during a car stunt in 2017. Rory went on to say, "I've certainly seen huge stars feel cowed into doing something that they've not wanted to do. 5 years have passed. We are making this tragic date by demanding mandatory health and safety education for all crew working in film and television." A lot of contrarians out there in the world seem to believe that as the person being asked to do these crazy stunts, it's your job to say no. But I pose another question. Why is it always on the person being coerced into doing these stunts to say no? There shouldn't even be a situation where someone has to choose between a life-threatening situation or business as usual. Of course, they always have the option to not do it, but when your livelihood is at stake, especially in such a cutthroat business as filmmaking where your name can get dragged in the mud at the snap of a hat, it's no wonder these accidents happen. And these are just the ones that I'm able to find information on. I can't even begin to tell you all how many accidents I see are talked about on IMDb, but when I go to look up lawsuits and articles, radio silence. Nothing to be found. And it's most likely because companies were able to quickly take care of the situation behind closed doors before it became a bigger issue. And that's the problem I have with these accidents. And that's why I'm going to continue to make these videos. I'll admit, when I posted my first video on film accidents, it was just a quick way for me to put out a video that week and get some quick views. But the more and more videos I put out and the more I researched these things, it quickly became evident that not just Hollywood, but the filmmaking business as a whole has big issues surrounding the safety of cast and crew. So if everyone else is too afraid to talk about it, then I guess I will. And I don't think I'm some hero for having a keyboard and the ability to Google stuff. I think anyone can do that. I just think there isn't enough coverage on real details behind these events. So I hope that in every video I've been able to bring to light some of these victims' true thoughts and feelings regarding their stories. If you made it here, then you made it to the end of today's video. I'm gonna try and be like as quiet as I can because I know that a lot of people fall asleep to my videos, but if you're watching right now, thank you. Watching to the end of the video helps out way more than you think it does, and it's been incredible being able to do this as my job. There's not like a lot I want to say right here. I just thank you to everybody that has been supporting me and always continues to. I hope that I'm providing unique content and unique videos for the internet, and I hope you guys just like what I made. That's it. That's all I want to say right now. Yeah, without further ado, we'll get to the patron shout out. If you're on screen, thank you so much. It is honestly, I still can't believe people are on the Patreon. I feel like, I have been putting some stuff on there, like the uncensored version of the last distributed media volume is on there. But before that, I feel like all I'm doing is just giving early access. So I know a lot of you guys are just supporting me because you can and you want to. And if that describes you, thank you. It does go a long way. It literally covers whatever bills it can. And yeah, that's how these videos are possible, is literally me being able to pay my bills and keep the lights on and do what I love. I love making videos, and I always will. And each and every person on the screen has helped just a little bit more to get me to keep doing that as much as I want. So, from the bottom of my heart, thank you. Now, with all that said, I will see you all in the next video. Thanks for watching.